Hi, I'm Laura.
I'm Deanne.
And I'm Philippe.
Welcome to our Lymond book club. We are reading Queen's Play by Dorothy Dunnett, and we are on the final chapter of the book, part 4, chapter 6. And by the way, we have a special guest star today. Her name is Harlem. I am fostering her. So if you see her or her sister River in the background, that's why. As we start out, before we get into the details, what did you two think of this final chapter overall?
I think we accurately predicted a lot of stuff. So kudos to us. I think it was a good ending. I thoroughly enjoyed how D'Aubigny was punished. I really sort of think it's the perfect fit for his character. Even though I saw it coming a mile away, I was still really sad in the Robin scene. And I think we're going to spend a lot of time talking about Oliamro and Lymond's discussion in the cottage, because that's such a pivotal part of this book. Yeah.
I think Robin's death was, we can talk about this later, but I think for the future of Lymond's growth as a character, like I think this was a really good way for this to happen, as opposed to him just being like killed by arresting soldiers or something like that. And then I really liked that we got sort of a scene with the Dowager. I like that the king took a stance, sort of. The stuff with the Oliamro was really good. There was a lot that happened in this chapter, and I felt like a lot of things were tied up well. The Lennox stuff was great. Mm-hmm. The George Douglas Margaret Lennox thing was really good. I still really like Margaret Erskine a lot. And it was just good. Like, it wasn't a chapter that was like, oh, it's so exciting or anything. Like, it wasn't like that. It was just a good chapter. And I thought it was a good ending to the story.
And I think it sets up well whatever's coming next, whatever that is. Like, I can see a lot of different possibilities coming out of this, but we'll get there.
Yeah, things were tied up well for this book, but I still have lots of questions that I want to see explored, and I'm very curious about where it's going to go next and all of that. So I think she did a good job.
Awesome. All right. I don't have anything to add to that, because I think we'll talk about it when we talk about how much this is a setup for things that are going to happen in the rest of the series. So Philippe, you want to take us through this chapter?
Sure. So we're going to start at chapter 6 of this part of the book, last chapter in the book, Chateaubriand, Satin and Scarlet. There's another silly ancient Irish law quote in the beginning. I tried to figure out what it meant to the rest of the chapter, but this one was a little bit harder to sort of suss out.
I have no idea.
Yeah. Something about a dog, something about a poet, something about the king, like
something about wearing two different colors of clothes and outfits and each of them being better than the other. I mean, I guess you could sort of see that as Lymond's two identities in this book, but I wouldn't say each one is better than the other, because you've got two sides of the coin with Tatty Boy Bala and Vervassal Harold.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could go super deep dive into like a chained dog, as is Lymond being used or refusing to be chained by the political powers around him, and then the poet, we see Lymond as the poet or the warrior, and that whole thing, and then your idea of like the two identities, or two things that you put off and on like clothes. But I kind of feel like it's just too, I'm not sure, I feel like that's just going too far into whatever. Like, I think it's just Yeah. I
Not a
think
clue.
the motivation is to
I
read.
mean, it could be something as simple as this was the last bit in that book. So she's like, well, this is the last bit in my book, so let's throw this part in here.
Yeah.
I'm sure
Somehow
she
it's
has
got
some
them.
kind of reason.
Yeah, Dunnett usually thinks these things out, so I'm sure it's in there, but this one's a little harder to sort of.
I mean, the first two are about like how ways of punishing people. So maybe it's about the punishment of Daubeny being apropos for his something that would hurt him. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, and the bit about satin and scarlet, it's all about showing off wealth. So like the king shows off wealth in these ways. Like these are clothes that regular people can't have, and the brass ring and all of that. And so it's all about ostentatious display of wealth. So
Which does happen later in the chapter when the king sort of uses his ostentatious wealth to rebuff Daubeny.
that's true. Yeah.
So jumping into the chapter, we begin sort of right as the last chapter ended with Michel Harrison chasing after Artist Cholet through the menagerie. And we get this fun chase scene that sort of closes in with all of the menagerie workers closing around Artis. There's a lion involved that sort of chases him up this stack of cages. I almost saw it as like a tower, but probably not too terribly high. And like the monkeys in the cages are like grabbing at him, and it's very interesting.
Lion cubs. That was my favorite part where it describes the little cubs like stealing the milk that's spilled. I'm like, oh, so cute.
I like the way that this whole scene it kind of ties together the menagerie imagery as well as the like sort of mythological Greek and Roman gods motif that kind of ran throughout the book. They're all kind of mashed up together in this as he's like running through the people that are dressed up and into the menagerie. It's just in keeping with the whole aesthetic of this book.
Yeah, and it was it was good. It was fun just to see this like chaotic short chase scene, I guess. But I liked all the animals.
Yeah.
And they seem to be like, we've had all these horrible things happen to animals in the book, and nothing horrible happened to an animal in this scene. And they seem to be like doing fine, so I like that.
I was super worried though that something would.
Oh.
Like when you had the camel biting people and like the lion trying to quarter Artist Cholet, I was like, please don't kill this lion. Like, please don't. Like we've had enough.
We have this lovely scene where Archie's like its mother, and Archie's like, okay, baby.
Yeah, that was sweet.
Well, yeah, I thought that was like one of the funniest things in the book is the way that you're sort of in Cholet's point of view, and he comes face to face with a lion, and it's like the most terrifying, moment of his life. He's so scared of the lion, and then Archie comes over and is like, "Do you have a kiss for your old mother?"
Yeah. Like nuzzling the lion.
Yes, not exactly a scary lion.
No.
So before the denouement of this scene where Daubeny and the royal archers show up and kill Artus, there's an interesting line on page 482 where Michel Harrison, Lymond has caught up with them, and Oliamro is there too. And of course, Michel Harrison is like, "Ha, you can swim like a blue-bellied viper, but what have you done about Robin Stewart?" So there's this reminder that like, you've got this thing you need to take care of. Why haven't you done it yet? And of course, Lymond's response is, "Left him to go his own gait for 5 minutes. Christ, Michel, my leisure in the last half hour has been a little circumscribed." It's like, I understand he's been doing something very important and saving the queen, but he's still pushing off. Even when they can see that Artist Cholet has been captured and they have the information, they'll get the information they need. He's still sort of pushing Robin Stewart to the side.
Well, yeah, he literally says, "What does it matter?" Like he's only thinking about the case against Daubeny. He's not thinking about Robin as a person at all.
Yeah, and it's just that Michelle replying, "But Stewart doesn't know that. He summoned you and you didn't come." It's just like, oh, yeah.
So yes, the archers show up. Somebody shoots an arrow at Artist Cholet. I wasn't sure if it was actually Daubeny himself or if it was just one of his archers. Hi, Kitty.
I think that Daubeny ordered one of his archers to do it.
Yeah, he definitely did. Also, on the back of the lion thing, a little bit, I love that he calls him this cabbage. He's like, I see my cabbage. It's like,
It's super cute.
so cute. Okay.
Albany also takes this moment to recapture Lymond because he's, if you have forgotten, which I don't think any of us has, he did escape from captivity. So he goes back into this tent with Albany, which is very precarious because Albany sort of knows that they have all the information against him. And like all it would take is for Lymond to say one wrong thing to give any provocation to Albany, and Albany would be well within his right to kill him because he is a fugitive at this point.
Yeah, and it's the same thing he did to Cholet, just had him killed, even though he had no chance of escape because he's got the plausible deniability of like, oh, he tried to escape.
Yep.
I think there's also a notable moment right before it where Harrison kind of stands up to Daubeny, and I like the line, it was Michelle Harrison who lost his head because in this matter more than his head was engaged.
Yeah.
And of course Lymond leaps in to save Harrison.
Yeah, doesn't Albany go after him like he tries to attack his leg with his sword or something?
Yeah, and Lymond's very
leg, which is clearly already a bad point for him.
Lymond very deliberately disarms himself in a very dramatic way. Be like, because now if he's disarmed, then Diabni has much less justification for killing him. Oh, hello, cat. Which was super smart. You know, it's like if he has a sword in his hand, then Diabni can kill him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So that's where we leave this little bit there in the tent. Abernathy is there, sort of watching, but he's still under his disguise as this Mahout who only speaks Urdu. So he can't really interfere too much. So it's sort of up to other people, again, to rescue Lymond from this position, which will happen. But first, we're going to jump to the conclusion of Robin Stewart's character. Liam Rowe has gone to the cabin because Lymond has refused to go to sort of let him know it's all good. And he finds that everything is all set up neat, but there's nobody answering the door. The door's a bit of a jar. He goes in and finds Robin has killed himself with a dagger, which is sad, but I think we called it a couple of times. So not unsurprising.
It's not. Like there was no, I didn't see this ending any other way. Like either he was going to die being arrested or he was going to commit suicide. Like just, there wasn't going to be a happy ending here at all. One thing I think is interesting that Dunnett did is that she left us with Lymond. When she leaves the scene with Lymond, Diabni is reviling him. So Diabni is piling insults and verbally attacking Lymond. And we know that Lymond, like there are certain insults that can be yelled at Lymond that he will respond to. Like we know that this is a vulnerability that he has. So it's a nice little way of like, okay, we've kind of left him in this somewhat precarious position. Like he's thrown away the sword and he's made some smart decisions there, but he's still incredibly vulnerable to this man who, like, maybe he'll get in trouble if he kills Lymond, but Lymond will still be dead. So you've got that like tension there. And then she cuts to this really sad discovery that Liam Rowe makes. I just thought it was a nice way to keep us engaged with the story.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple things in the Liam Rowe scene when he goes to Robin that I think are interesting. One of them is that he had actually helped to beat the truth out of Peter Dooley and had thrashed him until the stick broke, which makes him feel nauseous. So here's our Liam Rowe man of action, and like these constant reminders that by taking action, you have to take maybe morally ambiguous action or action that may be for the greater good, but hurts other people and hurts your own soul. So I think there's a very clear parallel with Liam Rowe and Lymond in terms of the setup for what's coming next for Lymond in that it is the right thing to take action in the world to try to make the world a better place, but it isn't going to leave your own heart and soul untarnished.
Yeah. And I love that the very next thing that she says about Oliamro is that, for he was tired, more tired than he remembered being ever in his life. And then it says, even Lyman's trained body, he guessed after the double swim, the nervous network of the books, the nervous work of the boats, the hard row must be bone weary by now. And there's sort of this implication that, oh, he's tired because he had this physical feat that he just did. But I think the implication of that line, like right after the thought of it curled his stomach yet, for he was tired, more tired than he remembered, is that like he's emotionally exhausted because of this moral, like he's had to break his morality and his stance, and he's exhausted, like heart exhausted, not just body exhausted.
100%. And another parallel with, like, think of Lymond in the last book and how heart and soul and every form of exhausted he was. Also, I liked the moment where he's on this ride to find Robin Stewart, and he thinks of it as a triumph of unreasoning instinct over the sedate, ironic soul which had lounged in the sleeve loom, commenting with some wit every now and then, and on just some such dramatic embassy. So the idea of having been that person on the sidelines, observing the world and commenting with wit, is a much more comfortable place to be, because when you're acting in the world, you're the one who's being commented upon. And like, I feel like we've all been in that situation where you're commenting on these people that are super passionately engaged in stuff, and you're just kind of like, oh, you know, like how silly of that one or whatever. And yet being there in that moment, it's actually really hard. And, you know, maybe we should have more empathy when we just kind of sit back and comment on the people that are trying to make the world better.
Yeah, absolutely.
I found it interesting and not at all strange that after all this had happened, the explosion of the fireworks, you know, the assassin being captured, that the English and the French are just continuing their banquet as if nothing happened. In fact, they had the news of what had occurred, and both ignoring it were ending their banquet. So it's business as usual for them. Never mind what could have happened, you know. I wonder if things had gone differently if Mary Queen of Scots had died, if they would have stopped. Or they'd been like, well, we've got to finish the ceremony. It's begun.
There's one more thing I want to say about Robin, though, and it's that, like, earlier in the scene with Lymond, there was this discussion of he didn't go see Robin, and so then it's gonna, like, Robin's gonna stab him in the back, was kind of it said he summoned you in Stewart terms, he summoned you and you didn't come. In Stewart's terms, that means a knife in your back. If you don't want 3 queens mourning their darling boy, my advice would be go and find him first, fast. So it's like, if you don't go find Robin, he's gonna become violent against you. Like, he's gonna do this violence to Lymond. And then at the end of this scene where Liamro finds him, it says, when the explosion came and the birds were silent, then left the trees in a calling cloud of alarm, he had received notice of his ultimate failure. So the thing that, like, it's partly that Lymond failed to come and that he wasn't able to make that connection with Lymond, but it's also that he failed in this attempt to be this person that he was trying to be. So he failed. Then indeed, Robin Stewart had taken out his knife and held it high in his fist, but not to use it against Lymond, to use instead conscientiously, doggedly, steadfastly, which is that, like, this is the person he's going to be, conscientious, steadfast, etc. Steadfastly against the man even a Lymond could not befriend. He had killed himself. And so just this tragedy of him, like, almost becoming this person, and then hearing this explosion which says all hope is lost, like he's failed. And it's I think it is that Lymond didn't come, but it's also that he failed, you know, and so he kills himself.
Yeah, I think he completely believes that it's his own failure, because he's even thinking here, we had all these thoughts earlier on about him wanting a friend and him being invited over to places, trying to make friends, thinking he's liked, but kind of knowing underneath that they don't really like him and that they're just inviting him over to mock him. And it's the same way he thought about Taddy Boy. It's the same way he thought about Bryce Harrison as, my friend, and every friend he's had has betrayed him and like thrown him away. And so in this moment, he's waiting for his last friend. And then when he fails, he thinks of himself as, someone that even Lymond couldn't befriend, couldn't care for. So I think he's completely just believes that he's unlovable and a failure, and that's why he doesn't.
And these last 3 paragraphs leading up to the suicide reveal are just incredibly sort of heartbreaking, about how he was waiting and even holding out hope until he heard the explosion, re-raking the fire coals, like just trying to make sure everything is prim and perfect for when Lymond finally does arrive, even though he's late. Oh.
Yeah. It's so sad.
Dunnett knows how to get to you.
I know.
Okay.
So then we jump into the Queen Dowager's perspective. It sort of jumps back in time a little bit. So we go back to the moment when Mary Queen of Scots and her whole retinue sort of come to shore, and the Queen Dowager is waiting for them. And there's a nice little aside where you see Margaret Lennox is like staring at Lymond swimming in the pond. And we get this lovely meeting of the Margarets, as I call it, where Margaret Erskine and Margaret of Lennox sort of face off with each other, which is nice and juicy.
I also thought it was interesting that Margaret Lennox is to Margaret Erskine the woman she disliked above any other.
Well, she's responsible for her sister's death.
Yeah, I know, but it's just like, oh, right. Like there was just this nice reminder of like, oh, yeah. Margaret.
So I guess Christian was like her foster sister, I guess.
Yeah.
I think also she dislikes her because we keep finding out these things, like Margaret Erskine knows all this stuff about Lymond and thinks of him as her protege. So she must have some inkling of how Margaret Lennox screwed him up.
Oh yeah, I think so. I definitely think she does. And then this line about, we cannot all think of nothing but ourselves.
I love it.
Like it's just such a stark contrast between the two Margarets. Like Margaret Lennox is solely selfish and is completely focused on her own gain to the detriment of her own happiness. Like she's willing to throw away things that might have made her happy for selfish reasons. And Margaret Erskine is in large part about her community, her husband, her siblings, even protecting her mother, trying to help Lymond to the best of her ability. Like she may not know the best thing to do or the best thing to say to him, but I think she's trying, and it's such a contrast between the two of them. But yeah.
Margaret Lennox is also the master of nasty insults disguised as compliments. Like, Jenny's daughter, one would never suspect it. I wondered, but you are a sensible woman, I can see. Which has this subtext of like, you're so plain compared to your fabulous mother or whatever.
Yeah, and then sensible is clearly like a dig, Yeah.
I do love how Margaret and Matthew sort of get caught up in their own game here and are sort of exposed by, of all people, George Douglas. And like George Douglas to the rescue here. He's like, the king can't disavow D'Aubigny. He never will. Like the assassin is dead because D'Aubigny killed him. So it lies to you now. It's like, and if you ever want to be cleared of any suspicion in his doubt, you're going to have to be the ones that expose him and like call him out. Like you're the only ones with the authority to do this. Just such a power move by George Douglas.
Yeah.
It's like, I have been back and forth about him for the entirety of both of these books. And I suppose if his character continues in the future, I will continue to be back and forth about him. But like, he's clearly on the side of Scotland and Lymond in this moment. And I'm here for it.
Yeah, and I'm totally waiting for the pendulum to swing the other way, though.
Oh, I know. It probably will.
I sort of feel like the next big move that George Douglas makes in whatever book he shows up in next is going to be like to totally betray Lymond in some way. Like, it just seems like that would be typical for him.
Well, the great like irony and amusing thing in this moment is that the Lennoxes and George Douglas are only out for themselves. It just so happens that in order to save themselves, they have to save Lymond in this moment.
Yeah.
And they're so pissed about it. Damn it. I think, George is probably amused by it, but
Yeah, I
Margaret
think
and
George
Matthew are pissed.
George is reveling in this moment. He's like, hey, guess what? You're going to have
Matthew is completely pissed about it.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, there's a moment when Matthew is escorting Lymond away, having rescued him, where he like almost hits him and then he remembers that he's rescuing him.
Right. Although there is the moment where he does say, like, of the two of them, he wished his brother dead more. So it's like there's these, and I feel like that was not like that was a close thing, like it almost happened that he would have saved his brother and let Lymond hang or burn or whatever, but yeah. And I do love also the dowager, like we get a little bit, I feel like it's good to see this moment where the dowager is super competent, because I feel like we need to see her as politically competent, because she had to have been to survive all this, but she's not coming up in her scenes with Lymond. She doesn't come up with the advantage. So it's nice to see here where Douglas sort of backs Margaret Lennox into, hey, you're going to have to do this. And so Margaret's like, I shall desire my husband to relieve Lord Dabney of his misapprehension. And the implication is she's going to go get Lennox. And then there's a chance for them to sort of confer and conspire, and who knows what they'll come up with. And then the dowager's like, so kind. And there's not the smallest need for you to leave us. As it happens, I sent to wait on Lord Lennox quite some time ago now, and here he is. So it's just like, there is no wiggle room. You will, which is nice.
It's all very polite too, which is funny because it's just, they're so pissed and it's all political maneuvering, but like, how kind.
So kind. And like the actual emotion behind that is, not nice. I was gonna say something rude, but okay.
So if we're moving on, we're going to go back to the tent where Daubeny is still sort of slinging these insults towards Lymond, and especially focusing them on Sibylla and all of the things that Lymond used to hear about Sibylla on the galley ships, which is interesting to me. Apparently Sibylla has some sort of reputation.
No, I don't think that's what it meant. He stood still in the presence of other men and heard applied to Sibylla, his own mother, a string of terms he had learned long ago in the galleys but had rarely heard since. I think it's the language.
Sure.
He heard all this. He learned all this super dirty, offensive language in the galleys, and now Dabney is using that about his mother.
Right. Okay.
Which I think just emphasizes that there's definitely something going on with Lymond's parentage or Richard's parentage, or what was his sister's name? Eloise's parentage. Like something's going on with Sibylla and her sexual life, to be blunt, like because lots of people are talking about it, and so
there's some sort of rumor going on about it that has been discussed.
For sure.
So I did want to call a highlight to the opening of this, which I think is very interesting. The phrase, a mind responsive to beauty is a storehouse with many rooms, words, sounds, textures, all the nobler exercises of the senses leave some image filed and folded to be summoned at need. There too, the brutal images are kept, the sights and smells and hurts, real and imagined, which the responsive mind accepts and has bedded deep. I like this because it's such a great way of describing how someone thinks and how Lymond thinks, and I think it's also like showing us how sensitive he is, that he feels these things so strongly and like perceives and remembers these things so deeply. And so this line, all these the uglinesses that other men forget were there waiting when Lord Daubeny turned the forbidden handle and half licensed by logic opened the door. So we know that these things that they're saying are bothering him because he's very sensitive. And I think that it's interesting that see, as we start to get more and more into Lymond's point of view, like we already picked this up, but we start to see how sensitive he is. And then we start to see that the coldness that he presents to the world and all the walls he puts up are kind of barriers to protect the very sensitive self that's actually underneath.
Yeah, and this, like, it's clearly a description of the repression that he's gone through, like that he has had so much trauma in his life, and he's so artistic and aware of the beauty of the world and all of that, and yet he has repressed, I think, certainly the trauma, but that doesn't work. Like, I mean, like, the modern audiences, we know that Lymond as a character is like definitely suffering from massive PTSD. Like this guy, there's no way that he's cobbled together a functional person. Like, he's certainly functional and he's able to move in the world in ways that serve him and his needs. But underneath that, like, there are parts that are so broken, and it just makes me wonder, like, I don't think we've seen his defenses break down at all. Like these, like they said, this store, the brutal images are kept in this storehouse, and I feel like at some point in Lymond's story, like, this storehouse is gonna collapse and it's not gonna work. But I don't think it's in this book.
Definitely not in this book. I think it happened a bit in the Dell. That's why that was so powerful.
Yeah, I agree. But not completely, I don't think. Like, I don't think he's totally lost it.
Well, and he hasn't processed it, and he hasn't gotten past it.
Yeah, and he's doing a great job in this scene, by the way. I mean, like, keeping his temper, and I was impressed because he's exhausted and yet is able to, I love that he could not move unless he wished to commit suicide. So it's like
this is why we love him. He's very tough, and he makes jokes, and he deflects, and he's making all these jokes about his auntie, and and then he goes on the attack and implies yet again that Margaret Lennox's son is actually his bastard, which of course is not true. But he just likes messing with the Lennoxes.
Right.
But it's also perfectly timed. Yeah. Matthew walks in exactly that moment.
Right. Yeah. I'm not like, I don't think he actually intended to say that in front of Matthew. So
he has implied that in front of Matthew before, so he likes to jab that knife in and twist it.
I'm sure he wasn't upset that that's the moment Matthew walked in.
Yeah.
Especially since Matthew becomes his savior.
Yeah.
In an odd turn of events.
This bit about in the doorway is Matthew Stewart, Earl of Lennox, Lord D'Aubigny's dear older brother, white hatred in his face. And just that juxtaposition of, like, dear older brother when we know he's about to betray John Stewart, and white hatred in his face. Like, yikes. So
Lennox saves him, and then we have that great moment where Lennox had betrayed a leaning to violence. And then he's like, oh crap, I'm rescuing you, I can't hurt you. And I like the way the line or the section ends for them. Fate this time had been rough fingered with the Lennoxes. Again, that motif of fate that's kind of pervaded this book and played its key role in the last book.
So this is kind of our last bit with the Lennoxes for this book.
By the way, why does Lymond wink at Archie in this scene? What do you think? Because it says at the top of 493, it says Lymond looked from one brother to the other, brow raised as he massaged his arms, and glancing beyond to the keeper's dim corner, allowed one heavy eyelid to droop. It looks like he's, like, giving Archie a signal about something, but I wasn't sure if it was just like, hey, pay attention to what's happening, or if there was, I don't know.
He definitely winks at him. I'm not entirely sure why. It may also be like an acknowledgement that Archie was kind of there as his
like
moral support and his witness to what was happening, because obviously they're allies, but the but Daubeny doesn't know that they're allies. So maybe it was kind of like a acknowledgement and a thank you.
Right. And I was kind of wondering also if it was just like a, hey, this could go bad, you know.
Or maybe like a, hey, this is okay now. Like, I've
Hmm.
been rescued. It'll be okay. Don't worry.
Yeah,
That's true. That's true.
oh, I see it.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
It's all right. So since this is sort of the Lennox's last bit in the book, how much do we think they were actually involved in the whole plot? Like, were they co-conspirators? Did they know about it? Did they push Daubeny to do this? Which makes the betrayal all the worse for Daubeny, that Matthew Lennox is the one that's sort of putting a stop to it.
I think another interesting question is, was Matthew involved and was Margaret involved? Because I think it's possible that Margaret manipulated John Stewart into doing this without Matthew's knowledge,
True.
or at least slightly. Matthew doesn't seem to be smart enough to do this kind of thing. So
No, it's been mentioned several times that he's not the best strategist, so.
yeah. So I think it's completely, this is conjecture on my part, I think it's completely possible that Margaret manipulated John into doing this, John thinking that his older brother is totally in favor of it, and Matthew knowing nothing at all about it. Like, that seems reasonable knowing the people involved. But
I think it's possible. I think it's also possible that Margaret and or Matthew or both of them like may have dropped a hint, thinking that John was smart enough to do it in a more subtle way, and then once he started being so ridiculous and doing it in a way that got back to them and put them in danger, they both were like, oh, I wish we hadn't done that. Like, what an idiot.
Oh, yeah, I completely agree. I think there's no way this over-the-top batshit crazy plans has anything to do with Margaret Lennox. Like she's more subtle than that.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
But yeah, but the hint of like somehow kind of manipulating him through very oblique language, I think would be typical.
I mean, it definitely, and I mean, it definitely would benefit both of them, you know, for Mary to die because they have such a strong claim. So yeah. You could see either of them. They're both very ambitious.
And I feel like if Margaret had been in France this whole time and had personally wanted to see to the death of Mary Queen of Scots, she would have been dead by now.
But Margaret would only do it if she could avoid taking the blame. And she had been brought along specifically to take the blame. So there was no way she was going to be able to do it.
Yep. Okay.
All right. So we jump back to Lymond waiting at the cottage for Lymond to show up. And now it's been some 2 or 3 hours and Lymond still isn't there. And of course, when he does show up, you can see that he's taken his time to change his clothes and preen himself and look his best. So clearly we see, again, Lymond has put this off. There's a disregard shown for Robin Stewart's well-being in this moment.
And he's still kind of mocking him. Oh, the man will be prowling his tedious way around Chateaubriand, muttering threats. It was very, very callous.
Yeah.
So Lymond says, Robin Stewart is in there. He's not actually prowling around. Just go see for yourself. And Lymond enters the cabin and sees the scene that has wrought.
Yeah, and he knows something's wrong because he drops this casual attitude and like runs into the cabin. So he's not as indifferent as he's been sort of acting lately, you know, like this indifference to Robin, it's not actually real. He does care because as soon as he gets a hint that something's actually wrong, he's worried and runs. So
I think it's very telling that he opens the door, pressing the handle slowly like some living thing he might crush. He's already, I think, knows that something terrible has happened to Robin and that it's his fault, and he's afraid of, you know, going back to the beginning of the book and the conversation he had with Margaret Erskine about he wanted to do this in a way where he could pull out at any moment because he didn't want to risk anyone dying because of him. suddenly that comes crashing home and someone died because of him.
Mhm.
And he even later said, he talks about some blameless soul will be pulled from its orbit. And it's like, Robin wasn't blameless, but Lymond, all he can see is like innocent people die because of me.
But
Yeah.
whereas usually it's because of his action, this time it's almost because of his inactions. So like he tried a different tact to go about it, and it still ended up in somebody dying because of it.
Yeah. I think one of the tragedies of this scene is that what Robin wanted to happen, which was Lymond acknowledge that he's like that Robin has changed his ways and he's become this meticulous and thoughtful soldier, and like he tried to like set this scene to prove that he was different. Like all of those things that Robin was hoping would happen happened. Like Lymond comes in and it says, but all the rest of the room was as Robin Stewart had left it. The mended chair and the clean floor, the perfect pack and the shining sword, the signs of thought and decision and painfully meticulous striving. And he sees it, and it's like, it's too late.
Well, because Lymond, this is what Lymond was trying to inspire him to become, and it worked. But Lymond wasn't there when Robin most needed him to be, you know? If he had just been more attentive, you know, the thing that he was trying to do to help Robin would have come to fruition. He did it halfway and then stopped.
Yeah. And he tried so hard to be Lymond.
Mm-hmm. Just in the manner of his dress and his kempt hair, and like he went all out to make this right, to like make it up, to show Lymond like, I've done it. I've done everything you've asked of me.
Yeah. And it's also like, we may wonder, and we never, I think, can say 100% sure, what did Robin feel for Lymond? Was it that he wanted to be his friend? Was it that he wanted to be him? Was it that he was in love with him? Was it all of those things? Was it, you know, mix? Who knows?
I think it was some manner of all of those things. Like I think that Robin did not have like a mature way of dealing with the world and his emotions. Like he didn't interact with the people around him in a way that was mature. He was still a kid, basically, in a lot of his, you know, the world is unfair. And, you know, that's a child's view of the world. And he's still living in that. And so was he in love with Lymond? Was he desperate to become like Lymond? Did he desperately want a friend? Did he desperately want a mentor? Like, I think the answer to all of that is yes. You know?
Lymond calls it hero worship on 497.
Yeah. Which, that's part of it too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a really interesting moment with Oliamro while Oliamro is kind of watching this happen, where like at first he's expecting Lymond to come out like blustering and defensive, but Lymond doesn't come out, and slowly Oliamro gets more and more nervous, and then he goes in, and he finds him, you know, obviously deeply upset, and he's like at the window and he's got Robin's blood on his clothes, so he like touched his body. And he's his knuckles and nails are yellow white with pressure on the ledge of the window. So this, by the way, is, I think I mentioned this before, watch Lymond's hands. That tells you what's going on with him a lot of times, more than his other body language or his voice. But this, I think this is a moment where Oliamro also realizes that there's more to Lymond than this shallow, you know, sort of person who's very playful with other people. That the depth of what he's feeling, there's this moment where Oliamro's like in deep waters now. He hadn't realized that Lymond had this side to himself.
I love how we explore Oliamro's inner thoughts here. How like we get what the old Oliamro would have said when he first sort of showed up, and then he struggles with the grim realization of what the new Oliamro, but the issue was quite other. And then, you know, Lymond sees that he's standing there deep in thought and asks him, thinking hard, Philippe, there must be some excuse you could mention, and all Oliamro can say is, you learn. So
I think that this is, to go back to the bottom of 495, I think this is a good sign. It's a really good illustration of how Oliamro has grown, because, you know, it says that he stood staring down at his linked hands as a man might, merely considering a disturbing problem. Had you not seen Stewart's blood on his shirt, and then the way his hands are gripping that. And I think the implication is that, you know, before, Oliamro would have just seen, oh, he just looks like a guy who's got a problem. Like, Oliamro would not have seen the details that show Lymond's true self before all of this happened. And so it's like Oliamro would have looked at the surface but not looked beyond the surface, and now he looks beyond the surface and sees what's really going on, which is just a really nice character moment for him.
It's set up really well, because we remember that there were several moments earlier in the book where, like, Lymond was working really hard, for example, and Oliamro missed it. And that's part of where Oliamro's antipathy toward him came from, was missing these things where he was working really hard and where he was more vulnerable than he was.
Where
Oh,
that
yeah.
yeah.
I love how their conversation evolves into this sort of treatise on leadership, where Oliamro, who also has learned so much in this book about the qualities of leadership and has grown as a leader, is sort of trying to pass that knowledge on to Lymond and saying, you're a leader now. Like, you did the best that you could do in this situation. You did right by these people, even if it meant the death of Robin Stewart. And it's just so interesting that this is coming from Oliamro, because we've seen both of their growth arcs throughout this whole book.
I think there's a moment before that too, right after Oliamro says you learn, where, and it's right before that. So Laura mentioned that line about every breath I draw seems to twist some blameless planet from its orbit. But I love the line where he says, I seem to be armored with size no one can see. And it's like he's got this image of himself as like an invisible grim reaper, like just walking through the world, killing people, and that it's his fault. And kind of the implication is that people don't see that it's his fault, but it is his fault. So he's, even if he's not getting the blame from other people, and it, you know, it's got to go back to his sister, where in so many ways where it's, you know, was it his fault that she died, and he was blamed by so many, and himself, and like, it's just all of that got twisted up. And
Yeah, I always think of him in the galleys knowing that he's killed his sister and then trapped for 2 years, like just having to stew in that and not have any friends to talk to help him get out of the negative patterns of thinking, just internalizing it in this super traumatic situation, like, and suffering this horrible traumatic situation, believing this is completely my fault because I killed my sister. So I think also that scene, that moment, is really important, because right after it, Lymond says, I suppose you are right. A cell is safest, or a tower, or a bog, to discuss the world of men and laugh at it, or even pray for it, but not to meddle with it. So in this moment, he's saying, you were right at the beginning. It hurts too much, and it's too dangerous to try to, engage with the world and change it for the better. And this is where I think all of these characters are kind of potential directions that Lymond could go with his life. And he's kind of on the cusp in this moment of kind of stepping back and saying, I'm done. I'm not engaging with the world. I'm going to go back to my library and read and not be involved because it's too dangerous. And obviously that's not the best use of all of his amazing talents. He has these talents he wants to, that he can use to make the world a better place. And normally he wants to, but he has this moment of I just need to stop engaging because I'm a monster and I'm going to just cause people to die. And then this is where Lymond steps in and talks him out of it. And it's no, you were right. I've changed. You showed me a better way to live my life. I am better for you. Una is better for you. Even Will Scott is better for you. Christian probably wasn't, by the way, but Will is. He's obviously been talking to Margaret Erskine. And it's like, you did the right thing, but you made a mistake in this situation, but it's not a reason to withdraw from the world entirely. It's a reason to do better next time.
Yeah. But I have to wonder what Christian would say. Like, would she say that she was better off without Lymond? And then you have to ask the question, like, if you go around saying everyone is better off without me, but those people don't agree, are you taking agency away from the people around you? Like, does his sort of taking on all of this guilt take away the agency from other people? Like, you know.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I mean, that's all, you know, every time Spider-Man leaves Mary Jane for her own good, all the ladies in the audience are like, stop making decisions for other people.
Right, exactly. Exactly. I had something I was going to say. Oh, we'll get to it.
I also thought the line was interesting. The issue is that Francis Crawford set out to capture the mind of this man, and having used it, dismissed it like one of his horrors.
Mm.
Which is what he did. And it's also what he doesn't want to happen to him, all these people that want to control him, and the way the Queen Dowager uses and dismisses him. So it's like kind of extra egregious that he did it to Robin.
Yeah.
And then I also just love Liam Rose line, you might have the grace to wince at my little fledgling sides.
Yeah.
So there's a moment in here at the bottom of 496. Lymond, still resting with his back to the window, put up a hand suddenly for no obvious reason and dropped it again. He said coolly, how did you know about these people? This is right after Liam Rowe brought up Christian and Will. What do you think that was, that moment where he put up a hand suddenly for no obvious reason and dropped it?
Well, is he responding to, okay, so Liam Rowe lists off all these people that he really shouldn't know about unless someone's told him. And he's like, I'm a graduate of your academy too. You might have the grace to wince at my little fledgling size. So Liam Rowe's saying, like, I've taken on this same level of guilt, not at the same level, but I've taken on the same guilt. And so Lymond is like, you know, and then puts up his hand and then drops it again. How did you know about these people? So something about what Liam Rowe says right there makes him respond.
Well, he brings up Christian and Will and Una, all these people that Lymond thinks that he's hurt. Mm-hmm. I think that this is a very telling moment because his voice is cool. He said coolly, but his hand actually comes up and down for no obvious reason. So I think he's having such an intense emotional response that he like responds physically by like taking up his hand, like maybe it's like a headache, like he's going to touch his head or something, and then he stops himself and puts it back down. He's trying to stay in control and be cool, but this is kind of telling us in the audience, like, he's super having an intense emotional reaction to Liam Rowe hitting so close to home with these references to these people that he feels responsible for hurting.
Right.
I mean,
and we talked.
I said that he can be as cool and collected as he wants to be on the surface, but like you said, always use the action of his hands. He ends up punching through a glass window a page later. So,
well, and also we just had the sequence about, you know, showing us how sensitive he is. So I think, you know, that all ties together. Like that kind of sets up this. We know how sensitive he is, even though he hides it. And then here we're seeing him. At first, we're seeing him through Liam Rowe's eyes, and we're just seeing this involuntary reaction that tells us how, you know, intense his reaction is. And then we actually slip into his point of view very briefly in the next 497. Where we hear, you know, him thinking he'd already said in spite of himself more than he wished. And he thinks no one but himself need be obsessed by the clever decision to lay by soft handling so that Stewart might stand up for himself. And then he's thinking about what he said to Robin and just like feeling this profound guilt. This word obsessed is interesting. Like he's obsessing over his failure and that he, you know, caused Robin to die. And suddenly now Robin is blameless and it's all his fault.
Yeah, well, that description of himself is like he made a clever decision to lay by soft handling. Like he could have been nicer to Robin. He could have handled him more softly and chose not to. and thought he was being so clever. And now he's doing this like self-castigate, you know, like he's blaming himself for like, I thought I was being clever, but I wasn't, it failed. And so, and I'm not sure, like, he's not wrong. Like, you know, like he did make a mistake, and he should have had more mercy for Robin in those moments. And like Robin would have responded better to kindness instead of harshness at that time. And so there's a part of me that's like a little bit okay with Lymond going through this like dark night of the soul where he's, you know, thinking like, maybe I shouldn't be quite so clever in how I manipulate people. I mean, especially people that he knows are vulnerable. Like, if he can manipulate Margaret Lennox all he wants, you know, like, go for it. But it's the people that are vulnerable to this that, you know, maybe if he realizes, you know.
How do you think this is going to change his behavior in the future?
That is one of my questions for later in the book. Yeah. I think that's a key question. What is he gonna take away from this moving forward? And how is this gonna change his behavior? And that's not something I really want to speculate about, because I really want to see what Dunnett does with his character. Like, I want to see, how does he grow, and what does this, is he going to make the same mistake again? Is he going to change? You know, the most devastating thing would be, what if he learns and grows at this point, treats the next person differently, and that also ends up in disaster? You know? So,
which it very well might.
Very well might.
So there's also an interesting line right after that. That's the one where he says, hero worship is the only oozing emotion I seem to be able to inspire. Do you think when you say he's going to try to treat the next person differently, how is he going to do that then?
You know, it leads to nothing but misery. So I don't know, like, is he going to try and be more grounded with people? Maybe.
Not so easy to fall in love with, maybe.
Yeah. Or like less. It would be interesting to see if he tries to be less distant. You know, he doesn't. We've talked before about how he's so reluctant to be vulnerable around people. But is that what is inspiring hero worship in everyone? Is this distant, competent person? So if he becomes less distant with people, would that, I don't know. We'll have to see I'm curious to see how he processes all of this, which I do not think has happened in this book. Like, yeah. So he's got an inkling of a lesson, but I don't think he's processed it. So.
I think also the thing that inspired Robin was the rooftop race, that overwhelming, you know, experience of all of Lymond's gifts directed at him like a laser, you know, not just his physical capabilities, but his charisma and his ability to inspire. So, you know, maybe Lymond needs to be more careful with those gifts and where he directs them.
Yeah. But also I feel like, so I'm reluctant to ascribe to Lymond like almost magic powers. Like, I feel like this, like, so beautiful, so competent, so like, he's just so wonderful that it's like, I'm reluctant to do that. So I feel like, what if the flaw isn't that he directed all of those strengths towards Robin, but that he also hid his weaknesses? You know, like, what if the flaw is not that he's competent and beautiful and exciting and charismatic, but the flaw is that that's all he's showing? It's not like, you can show those things, but also be vulnerable and show the places where you have cracks and weaknesses. So, but I don't know, like, maybe not. Like, we'll see.
I mean, I think part of the lesson here is that those gifts, which are like, it's over the top as it is, those are part of his character, are dangerous. Those are like an ingredient in the sides. By being able to inspire people to follow him, he inspires them to die for him. So what, looks from the outside like an amazing set of gifts, so charismatic, so capable, is actually just a terrible thing that can cause him to kill people, basically, from his perspective. So.
Yeah, but I think we see the same thing that we saw with Will Scott, where it's like if he had brought Will Scott into his plans, if he had shown him what was going on, if he had talked to Robin more directly and honestly about things, it wouldn't have ended up the same, and it wasn't that he was inspiring that was the problem. Like, he's inspiring and that's great. But it's that he's also not willing to be more than that. It's almost like he's letting these men see a version of himself that is sort of perfect and strong and beautiful, which is one reality of his character, but it's not all of his character. Like, I don't know, if he'd shown Will Scott more of what he was actually going through and what that plan actually was, I think Will would have been 100% loyal, and wouldn't have led to disaster. Like, that, it was Will's loyalty wasn't the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's true. Maybe if he opened more, or was more honest, it would help. I don't know. It's probably some mix of, you can't, I mean, it's also, it's dangerous to be able to make people fall infatuated with you. If you don't feel the same about them, it's going to hurt them.
For sure. Yeah.
So there's this moment right after this. Lymond says, "And that you think I should find easy." And even to himself, his voice sounded odd. It was cold. Oliamro spoke, and it came to Lymond only then that something was happening to him, that he did not know if his eyes were closed or foolishly open, or even if he were moving or not. It was the last bloody, squeak-gutted, pusillanimous straw. As Oliamro began to run towards him, Lymond swept round to the window, and then he slammed his arm through the window. What happened there?
Well, we skipped the whole question on leadership, like that whole discussion. I think he loses it physically, but it's coming from this whole speech that Oliamro gives about, you did this and you did that, and for your leader. So, like, I'm telling you now that you did right with Robin Stewart. I'm telling you that the error you made came later when you took no heed of his call, which, true, sort of. It was too late then, I know it, but he should have been in your mind. He was your man. True for you, you had withdrawn the crutch from his sight, but still it should have been there in your hand, ready for him. For you are a leader, don't you know it? I don't surely need to tell you. And that is what leadership means. It means fortifying the faint-hearted. So here's the key, I think. It says, it means fortifying the faint-hearted and giving them the two sides of your tongue while you're at it. It means suffering, weak love, and schooling till it matures. So hang in there with them until they grow. It means giving up your privacies, your follies, and your leisure. And here's where I have a problem with what Oliamro says. He says, it means you can love nothing and no one too much, or you are no longer a leader, you are the led. And I think Oliamro makes a huge mistake there. And like, that's not, because so that's where Lymond replies and says, and that you think I should find easy. And then he has like this physical fainting, collapse, phasing in and out, like, and then hits the window. And yeah, but that line about it means you can love nothing and no one too much, or you are no longer a leader, you're the led. Like, what do you think about that?
hard for me to understand how Liam got that out of what happened, because he didn't love anyone or anything too much. So why is that the lesson?
Right. Me too. I think that's super weird. Like, I like the part about you need to hang in with people until they mature. You need to like give them both sides of your tongue. In other words, be kind and be critical at the same time. Like, I think all of that's totally legitimate and comes out of this, all of this lesson. That makes a lot of sense. But that last thing about not loving people too much, like,
is Liam pulling from his own experience with Una here?
Maybe, but he didn't love her too much. Like, I still don't get why he gets this as a lesson.
Yeah.
I can get that he says nothing and no one. So maybe the nothing is like Lymond, and it's right if he says it means giving up your privacies, your follies, and your leisure. So maybe he's thinking of Tatty Boy, who put his leisure and his follies ahead of his, treatment of Robin, which he totally did. He was really careless toward Robin because he was drunk and partying. But the love part is weird. The nothing, love nothing. So maybe he's thinking of, Lymond's loving his adventures more than his loyalties, or he's, focused on the wrong things when he should be sacrificing and dropping everything and going to Robin at this time. But
then in that case, it would be like, you should love the right things, not the wrong things. Like, and instead he's saying you should love nothing, which is super weird. And then this is the thing that I think Lymond's responding to, where he says, and that you think I should find easy. In other words, like, do you think it's that Lymond is hurt that Liam thinks it would be easy for him not to love others?
I don't know, because I think, this is following on the speech where Liam was basically telling him what he did wrong. The error you made came later when you took no heed of his call. So he's basically saying, this is your fault. It's not wrong of you to act upon the world, but you made a mistake here, and Robin's death is your fault. I think it's hard for me to tell if Lymond's reaction is about you can love nothing and no one too much, or if it's just about feeling really internally powerfully that Robin died because of him. Or, maybe it's about this idea of sacrifice, having to sacrifice parts of who he is. Like, so much of this book was Tatty Boy is this part of who he is that he then gave up and became this vassal character, and does he have to sacrifice that part of himself, the part that was more driven by, his emotional side? Maybe it's to be a leader, you have to sacrifice really important parts of yourself that you value, and that's what he's struggling with.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm struggling with this whole thing where it's like, so you can't love anything too much. You can't love anyone too much to be a leader. And Lymond says, you think that should be easy for me. And then he collapses. So it's like he's saying, it's like, it's upsetting to him that Liam thinks he doesn't feel things deeply, or that it would be easy for him not to feel things deeply. Yeah, and so is the implication that Lymond not only does feel things deeply, which we know he does, but that he also wants people to see that he loves things deeply, and he's upset that Liam thinks he doesn't?
Or he's upset at the idea that Liam thinks he shouldn't.
Yeah. Because that would certainly not be easy for him under any stretch of the imagination.
I think what's happening here is he has this idea, or this internalization of this realization that he's going to have to give up a lot to be a leader, that it's going to be painful and it's going to hurt, and that he'll lose things that he loves, and that he just has to accept that and keep going.
Because apparently he's super young.
As we keep getting reminded in this section too.
As we get reminded very much in this section, and I'm like, how old is he?
We're going to do that for a while.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting in this, whatever this kind of semi-blackout experience that he has, that his reaction to it is like rage. he feels himself having this, whatever this episode is, and that's what it was, the last bloody sweet-butted piece of land of straw. That's his rage. That's why he slams his hand through the window. And then I think whatever the slamming his hand through the window, the pain, the fresh air is what like snaps him back to himself.
Yeah. And then Lymond calls him a child. Which I'm like, okay.
And then he agrees it's pure melodrama, how my brother would agree.
Yeah.
What do you think? Is that the reaction of a child? I mean, he doesn't tell him he's a child. He says this is the work of a child, meaning this reaction of slamming your fist through the window is childish.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
I mean,
it's not really befitting of what we've seen of Lymond before to really react in this way. So like, this is a very intense moment for him, but like, it's also a danger to him. Like, he could have really hurt himself by doing that. And like, what's the point? What are you getting out of this? Why do this?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the equivalent of punching a wall, you know, or punching a door or something. Like, yeah, I don't think that's the most mature way to handle extreme emotion. But on the other hand, if the alternative is to like punch a person, then like, you know, hit the wall. Yeah, like, sure, is it kind of childish? I guess so, but there's lots of things that are more childish than that. So
I think it was also that it's not coming from a place of like acting out like a child. It's coming from this really like intense like existential despair and trauma and anger.
Yeah. And there's just this bit about how he compares Lymond to his brother. And it's like, yeah, my brother would probably agree. It's like, I guess it's true. But there's that ellipsis gives us the sense it's like, maybe it's not true. You know?
Well, or that it was painful and that it's going to be slow for him to internalize it.
But he's not quite agreeing, but he's like, yeah, you're probably right. You know, like that.
I think he does definitely feel, I mean, obviously that Robin's death was his fault. And so.
Oh, for sure.
It's true.
Definitely.
Sure.
I think it's also interesting that like Lymond at first, he's just kind of like still in this kind of fugue state where he just sits at the table and Lymond has to come and like take care of him and bandage his arms. But then he slowly puts up his walls again. And by the end, he's sitting there quite collectedly watching him with a sort of desiccated courtesy. So he kind of breaks down and shows way more of himself than he had been intending to show to Lymond. Has this very honest scene, and then he puts his walls back up.
Yeah. Yeah. And then he falls asleep. You know, like they dig the grave. They dig the grave for Robin and he falls asleep. Like legitimately, or at least rests for a bit, you know.
Well, I think that's also a really interesting moment because Lymond has this sudden moment where he's like afraid and he kind of like he hears or he doesn't hear Lymond. Lymond is silent, and Lymond looks up like worriedly, and then sees that he's fine and that he's just sleeping. And I think this is Lymond having maybe a sort of almost subconscious inkling of Lymond's suicidal tendencies that we saw in the previous book, where he's worried that like Lymond is hurt or something bad has happened, and you know he looks up and reassures himself that he's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but he also has that moment where he tells him what Margaret said, which I thought was interesting. That the noblest and most terrible power we possess is the power of like our words, thoughtless words, and the way that like what we say thoughtlessly has an impact on people.
Yeah, speak.
You have to learn to accept the consequences of the things you say.
Which Lymond does not have a problem with. Like
he's good at accepting consequences, but
consequences, yeah.
He sure a lot of awful words pop out of his mouth, and that doesn't change.
That's true. Yeah.
Mm.
There's also this one last moment, looking down at Robin in the grave, and Lyman's looking at the meticulous shadow of himself, and then he bends to obliterate it forever.
Yeah.
I like the care and meticulousness he takes in digging this grave and making sure that it's really tidy and sort of perfect as sort of a last honoring of Robin Stewart.
But I also think it's ironic too, where he says like, let us be tidy at all costs. And it's like, I think there's a little bit of bitterness at himself because that's the language that doomed Robin. Like in some ways, you know, he's blaming himself for this. And so he's like, instead of saving him, all I can do is make his grave tidy, you know, and it's a bit of, yeah, I think that was a little bit of an ironic statement.
Yeah, he focused on the wrong things. But I think he does, I think Philippe, you're right, that he makes it the neatest grave he can to honor Robin as much as he can. I also think it's interesting that Lymond almost certainly couldn't have saved Robin even if he had been super responsive and meticulous, because he was busy saving the queen, and it was Peter Dooley who held the information back. And then Lymond was apprehended. So like, even if he had done everything he could to get Robin and put Robin first, it still wouldn't have made a difference for Robin. So it's like, it's not that Lymond's failure was, it's something about, you know, it's not that it would have actually made a difference for Robin. Robin still was probably going to die anyway. He was still a fugitive who tried to kill the queen, but it's just that he was wrong not to give his all for Robin because Robin would have given his all for him.
Well, I also feel like there's a difference between what Lymond says and what Margaret Erskine says. And Margaret talks about the words that he used. And could Lymond have changed things by saying something different, by that moment where he didn't choose softer language to talk to Robin? Was that the moment that could have made the difference when they met in the woods? As opposed to, I think you're absolutely right. Like by the time Peter Dooley makes the choice to betray them, Robin is lost. Like there's no way to save them at that point. But I wonder if the real lesson here is about the language he uses when he did talk to Robin.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if he had been kinder and more positive and inspiring in a caring way, Robin could have ended up very different.
Or at least executed for the crimes he committed. In a way, like, I mean, like he probably would have still gotten arrested, and like I'm not sure Lymond could have saved him completely, but
he could have gone out in a more dignified way, partly redeemed somehow.
Especially considering,
I would like to think Robin would turn himself in instead of trying to escape to somewhere else, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, but also thinking like at this time in, you know, the 1500s, suicide is a mortal sin, and so there could have been, like, could Robin have died in a way that he would have been given last rites and like had more of a, like a dignified death?
Before we move on to the next section, I think if there's any proof, or if there's more concrete proof that this is going to affect Lymond going into the future, it's these last two paragraphs where Lymond sort of invokes the spirit of Robin. I want your help, Lymond had said to that face, to trim a bowless devil named Francis Crawford until there's a human place on his soul to put the mark of grace on. The living, Robin Stewart, had failed, but the dead, thought of Lymond, sinking back, his eyes on the green grass and the cottage from which now no smoke came, perhaps the dead Robin Stewart would achieve it one day.
Yeah.
I hope.
Robin is, this experience is definitely going to have some impacts on Lymond's behavior. We should think about it as we read the next book and wonder, was this a reaction to a lesson he learned in relation to Robin?
I wonder if he's going to try the complete opposite tact now with whoever comes next in the sort of protege role. So,
what's the opposite tact?
I don't know. just not as dismissive. So,
I mean, yeah, it would be more active mentoring. Would be perhaps an opposite tack to this. Like instead of ignoring Robin and then saying something towards the very end,
but not sorry.
Yeah.
Not the same kind of active mentoring he gave to Will Scott, though, because he was actively mentoring him, but not giving him all the information. So
yeah, he was kind of actively mentoring Will Scott, but also kind of dismissive of Will Scott at the same time. And then super dismissive of Robin. So maybe some sort of active, because we've heard mention that like he's a natural teacher. So maybe drawing on the skills a little bit.
Yeah, to use those skills in a more explicit, intentional way. What about how is he going to stop this hero worship that he finds so unpleasant?
I mean, the easiest way to do that would just be an asshole, and I don't really want to see Lymond take that tact. So
that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I really don't want to see that. Please don't let that be the thing that happens. Yeah, I mean, that one way to stop that is just to be an incompetent asshole, like, and not do anything well ever again. But that seems like a really dumb character choice. So
yeah, I can't see Lymond forcibly choosing to make himself seem incompetent as a tact, because it's such the antithesis of who he is.
Right, and as a reader, I really don't want to read that. Like, I want Lymond to be, James Bond, but better. Like, I want him to be that competent, dashing, but I want him to have the compassion and the care for people that Margaret Erskine is saying. Like, pay attention to your words and the impact that they have on people. And I think the implication there is pay attention as you say them. Don't just wait for the consequences to come later. Like, as you're talking to people and as you're dealing with relationships, pay attention to the casual words that you say. And so, who knows?
Okay. So if we're moving on, we next go to the king, and we finally get to see some of what Dee's been hoping for the last couple of chapters, where we see the king take some meaningful action, although I don't think it's quite to the level of what you wanted.
No.
I highly doubt that it is. So, but the king is in conference with Anne de Montmorency and with the queen. Diane de Poitiers is not here, which is a stroke of good fortune because she may have changed things a bit. But we find out that the English sort of requested what we thought they were going to do. They wanted to ask for Mary Queen of Scots' hand of marriage with Edward, but he turns that down. So he gives them his daughter Elizabeth instead. And then we get to what the king wants to do with D'Aubigny. And the very first line is, D'Aubigny will not leave this realm. Is that sufficiently clear to all of you? So he still doesn't want to outright condemn him because there's that friendship that they've cultivated throughout the years. But he knows with all the mounting evidence against him that he's going to have to do something. Mm-hmm. We also find out that he's decided to make Lymond the Comte de Sévigné. So he sort of gets this title. He's no longer the master of culture, which we already knew, but he's got this new title, but it's in France. It's not in his home country. So how he's going to deal with that is also something that I think will be interesting to keep track of in the future.
Yeah, I loved this bit. I think we get a real insight into what's going on with the king in the middle of 501, where it says, the accusation was true. Even the wronged boy of the Spanish prisons could understand that. Its very obstinacy in being blatantly true blinded him with rage. And so you get this sense that because the king was unjustly imprisoned as a kid, he's so resistant to like accusing D'Aubigny without absolute concrete proof. And you see that motivation, like that helps explain why he's been so resistant to this all along. And he's so angry that he can't ignore it anymore. Like, this guy is so guilty that the king is just like, he's clearly guilty. And the king is super mad that he has to condemn Diabni. And that's, yeah.
I think it's also telling the exchange she has with Catherine the Queen, which leads to Lymond becoming the Comte de Sevigny. I interpret it as Catherine is quite observant. She's been watching what's going on the whole time. She sees that Lymond is a potentially powerful person. She sees that he doesn't have his loyalty to Marie de Guise, even though they might have assumed that he was loyal to her. He's not. And so she kind of like makes a play for him, and it's like, oh, you know, if we make him a comte, maybe we can get him to work for us, which is a great kind of bookend to the way the book started with, you know, she wanted Crawford of Lymond, everybody wants Lymond. Here's Catherine and the consul making their little play for Lymond's loyalty too.
Yeah, that bit at the end where a new star was being born, not a star of Lorraine or of Stewart or of Douglas, and she and the constable were its sponsors. And so you just get this sense that she's like, oh, we're gonna launch this person into the world and be behind him, whatever. And you know that's not gonna happen. Like, no. There's no way. So
but hey, Lymond's a comte now.
Yeah. I just wrote, oh Lord, what now?
Well, and since they can't outright punish D'Aubigny, the king sort of comes up with this idea that since dueling is illegal, they're going to have a tilting sort of exhibition that evening. The two will take each other at the jousts. So this way they'll still have some sort of procession, because the water processional has gone to hell because all the fireworks went and the boats drowned, and we all know what happened there. So at least something can be salvaged, and this is how D'Aubigny's punishment will be meted out, because he doesn't quite give the whole plan now. We find that out later, but
yeah. Can we go back really quickly? Yeah, there's a bit of description that I just thought was gorgeous, and I just wanted to like, again with Dunnett's language and stuff, and this is the middle of 503 where she says, the long day exhaled its last and blue liquid night rushed in. Then the clusters of lights shone golden as fruit and the diamonds blazed. Then in the bed of each light, color, living, bright, vibrant, was suddenly reborn. Then the warm painted faces nodded and laughed. Then the drums beat and rolled. Lovely night had come and the lists were open. And it was just, I just thought that was so evocative and
beautiful.
She's great with imagery.
She was, and I feel you can see in her writing that she was a painter, because she's always describing like the light and the colors so beautifully.
Yeah. It was gorgeous.
So then also there's a couple of little moments that I liked in the kind of lead up into this sequence as it continues, especially Queen Catherine catching Liam Rowe's wandering blue eye with a flutter of her fan and smiling at him. And he's suddenly like amazed and bows to her.
Yeah. He has entered the fairy circle.
I love that it says he's sitting cautiously where he was placed, alarmingly near the lockjaw splendor of the assemblage extraordinary. And Liam was just like, I do not want to be near these people. And he's just kind of like, oh crap.
Well, you did publicly save the life of Mary, Queen of Scots. So.
Yeah. So just deal with it.
And then also I love the bit right after that. Lennox is there, George Douglas is there. George Douglas is feasting on subtle discomforts.
Yeah.
Like, what a description of him.
I mean, George Douglas is clearly not someone who's going to be loyal to anybody or anything, but I feel like he'd be a fun guy to have dinner with.
Oh yeah. For sure. And he and Lymond, like, I feel like they like each other, even though they don't trust each other, at all.
Yeah. I think they think of the other as like a worthy opponent in a good way, not like you're an enemy way.
Exactly. Yeah,
I love how George Douglas is talking to Margaret Erskine and like sort of going on to this long-winded explanation of how Albany has one last thing up his sleeve, and like Margaret just sort of shuts him down and she's like, "What? Just tell me. Like, stop speaking. Let me know what it is. Like, I've had it up to here with all of this. I've had a day."
Yes. She has had a day.
Oh, absolutely. She was almost on the boat that got scuttled.
I know, along with her siblings and the queen, and yeah, I do love that image. We blew past it, but the image where Margaret steps off the boat when the Dowager Queen meets them after the explosion, and she steps off the boat with the little queen and with her siblings, like she's got her younger siblings' hands in hers, and it's just like you get this image of this woman that like the world was blowing up around them and she was taking care of children. You know, and trying to keep them all from panicking. But, yeah, anyway.
So I'm sure that you have thoughts on the Margaret Erskine sequence in 505. She had sat by the hearth as she had promised, but the other promises she had made to Lymond she had never meant to keep. He was afraid of his power. He had to learn to live with its effects.
Mm-hmm.
This was the strength to sustain this burden was the very backbone of leadership, and he had to acquire it. Yeah. This is where she's like thinking of him as her protege, and that she's like intentionally set him up to learn this lesson.
Yeah, which I think is arrogant of her. Like the fact that she thinks that she understands him so well is like, I do think she's observant, and I do think that she sees more than a lot of people around her. And I really admire her as a character because she is steadfast, which can be boring. Like, I mean, like in the midst of all this very exciting, actiony, melodramatic story, she's kind of a boring character. But I think it's because she's steadfast and she's focused on her community in ways that are, in some ways that are really self-sacrificial. Like she makes her mother's life work, you know, like she as best she can, and I think she's a really good wife for Tom, and you know, supports him. And so this whole thing that she thinks about Lymond, like I love the fact that I think she admires Lymond, and I think that she thinks that he has incredible potential, that she sees him in ways so much better than the Dowager Queen does. Like Margaret Erskine if Margaret Erskine was the queen, like she would use Lymond, or she would ask Lymond to be part of her circle. I think my guess is in ways that he would respond to, as opposed to Marie de Guise, who doesn't. But at the same time, I think she's kind of arrogantly thinking, I need to teach him lessons, or he needs to learn these lessons. And there's a little bit of like, well, who is she to decide that, you know, and why does that get to be, you know, why does she think that's her decision? So, yeah.
Well, and just that she like promised him that she would protect people, which of course was a really weird promise, because how can she keep it? But then also that she promised it and never meant to keep the promise is just like super weird.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, you know, is she going to protect the people around her that to the best of her ability? I don't think she needs to promise Lymond that. Like the promise to Lymond is irrelevant. She's going to do those things, like because of her character. At least what we've seen so far, unless we get some sort of weird character change in her, I don't see her stopping doing that. Like she's from such a young age, she's had to be the one that was dependable. And I think it would be a weird violation of what we know of her character for that to change. So.
Well, I mean, her focus has obviously been on protecting the queen. She has this line, or this thought: 3 people had suffered by his presence in France, and she had done nothing to help them or him, for the strength to sustain this burden was the very backbone of leadership, and he had to acquire it. Yeah. So she intentionally did nothing to help, I guess it's Eliamro, Robin, and Una. Mm-hmm. But also, like, what could she have done? Yeah, so it's kind of...
What could she have done? Like, I don't know. Maybe maybe she could have helped Robin somehow, but again, that would be weird.
Like, in a way, it's sort of acknowledging that her promise to protect them was a superficial reassurance to get him to stay and help, and that they both knew that there was nothing she was actually going to be able to do.
Yeah. She's in a position of power, but it's a super limited position. Like, she's got a very limited sphere of people that she can influence. So,
Yeah.
well,
So then,
I guess it depends on how much Tom listens to her.
he's powerful, and he has the ear of the queen. So also, I think it is interesting that she thinks of him as free too of Sibylla, his mother, whose wits were as sharp as his own, and whose company he had precipitately left because it was so congenial and safe. So I feel like that's kind of interesting. We saw from Game of Kings that he is definitely a mama's boy.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, like, in order for him to branch out in the world and make his impact, he has to separate himself from his mother because it's too safe and comfortable being with her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then we get this really interesting interaction about marriage.
Yeah.
My little post-it just has like giant question marks on it.
Yeah, so many question marks. Like, you know, will you marry? Who do you suggest? Da, 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 da. And then he's totally entertained by this conversation, which I love. He's like looking even more entertained. And she doesn't know what he means by someone's been put forward, but he doesn't remember. And so then he says, at her expression, evidently, he had laughed aloud then. Better to be whipped than humored, better to be crushed than cherished. It was a woman who told me that. I live in a world of men, my dear, Lymond had said. I love you all, but I shall never marry you. I do not think that's true.
Well, I feel this is quite obviously a challenge that,
Clearly,
you know, is now we're just going to be like, okay, what's going to get him married?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I feel like this is the, like, if we look at this book series, we are 1/3 of the way through the story, right? So he's dropped this like definitive "I will never marry" line, like 1/3 of the way through the story, which it's way too concrete of a statement. Like maybe he will not fall in love with the love of his life. Like, maybe it will not be a beautiful story that ends up something, you know, whatever. Maybe that will be terrible, but he's definitely going to get married before this story ends, just because he so emphatically said he never would. So, yeah, but.
Also, oh, go ahead.
And who's the name that was put forward? Or is that just sort of a joke? Do we know?
Yeah, a name has been put forward. If I could remember what it was. Do we know? I don't think we know.
And how would he have forgotten it?
Is he just saying that to get Margaret's? I mean, obviously he wouldn't forgot. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
But it does make you think if he is going to marry before the series is over, if we've already met this person. You got a theory, D.
Die on that sword, damn it. Even though I'm sure it's completely ridiculous. Like, it's probably going to be like, I don't know, one of Margaret Erskine's younger sisters or something.
God, it better not be Una. Ugh.
Yeah, I hope not.
Oh, it can't be, because it said that was their first and their last time. I mean, it still could be. He could marry her. It could be a loveless marriage. I don't know what I'm talking about. I just don't want it to be Una.
I had a weird thought last night. So as I was thinking about this book, and I was thinking about the ways that Richard and Lymond's parentage and Sibylla's actions have been called into question. And I was thinking, okay, so we had this pretty long sex scene between Una and Lymond, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Lymond has definitely been implied to be sleeping with women before this, right? So I'm like, what if he gets a kid wandering around? You know, like,
Possibility.
some random, like, that could lead to marriage, or at least some sort of, really, I don't know. So
Or
like,
if he has a kid around somewhere.
Have in the story, like, bastard children is a thing that's part of the story so far. So I'm like,
Or what if Una's pregnant?
Yeah. Like, I mean, them having this very long sex scene is definitely part of the story. So
It's really the first one that they focused on in these
right.
books. So
Yeah. So
I mean, he's had his dalliances, but you know.
Yeah, it was certainly highlighted to the point that we absolutely could not miss it for sure. So
it's a good thought.
And I definitely don't think Una is gone from the story. She's way too interesting of a character.
She's gone from this book because we don't really focus on her again. She gets mentioned a little bit later, but that's it.
Yeah, so. But I don't think she's gone from the story as a whole. But I also don't think that Lymond I don't think she's good for Lymond. I don't think he's good for her. So.
Why not?
I think they're two super, super damaged people and their damage does not line up in a way that's like, I do not think I just don't think they're healthy for each other. Like it's not, I don't think they would help each other to heal at all. So, but. Okay, that was a tangent. Sorry.
Yeah.
It was an interesting one. A name has been put forward if I could remember what it was. I can tell you that there is an answer to this, but you can't know it yet.
Oh.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay.
Super weird line that she puts it in there because you can't know what it means from the book.
But it's in his past. We just haven't heard about it.
Yeah. And is he being sarcastic about forgetting? Like that seems like a super sarcastic line.
I'm not going to say any more because I would spoil you.
Okay.
Marriage and kids, huh? That's where your brains are going.
I mean,
no more books.
It seems like she's dropping some breadcrumbs here. There's some foreshadowing and, I don't think he's going to have like, let's go have a cottage in our, or let's go to the manor house at wherever his place in France is and, raise 12 children. And, I don't think that's what's going to happen in this story. But I would be intrigued by the complication of, can you imagine Lymond with a kid in danger?
Not current Lymond.
He would go ballistic if there was that's why it's so easy to know that Margaret Lennox's kid wasn't his kid, because I just think from what we know of Lymond, he would move heaven and earth if he thought he had a kid somewhere. So it would be interesting. I don't know. Anyway, back to the story.
So just finishing off this little section, and if there's anything else in this little section, you guys can talk about it. But we find out that D'Aubigny, because he is the challenger, gets to pick this laundry list of things that needs to be sort of brought to this duel. And because D'Aubigny has all of this wealth and resources, he can get a forfeiture out of Lymond because he'll ask for this ridiculous list of things. What do they call that when a musician has this contract that you have to fulfill? A writer.
Yeah.
So it's almost like D'Aubigny gets to have this rider of things that needs to be procured before the duel can begin.
Yeah. And it's so, and I must say, I was satisfied by this. So I was wanting D'Aubigny for his over the top, hyper dramatic, idiot plans to his downfall. And I feel like that happened. That he made this over the top, ridiculous plan that he thought was gonna be successful, and it just 100% backfired on him. And so I was very satisfied by that. I thought it was a good. And I even liked it that he didn't die, that he just got super humiliated and then had to live the rest of his life as like this inconsequential nobody out on the frontier of France, and like with the knowledge that everything failed. And if he'd just done nothing at all, he would have been fine. But he brought it all on himself. So.
Mhm.
It's definitely appropriate justice for the type of person he is.
So before we get too into that, I really want to talk about this little section where Mary Queen of Scots asks, when is he coming? And will he have the black hair again?
She
It's
knew
like,
the whole time.
of course she knew the whole time. But it's almost dismissive how the Queen Dowager is like, wait, how did you know that? Like, she's not giving her daughter the credit that she could have her own thoughts and like her own savvy about this.
Well, to be fair, every single person in the court missed it many times, and yet the little girl just knew all along and didn't even realize that nobody else knew, so she never called attention to it.
Well, I mean, a lot of people in the court didn't know Francis Scott of Lymond, Crawford of Lymond, sorry, before.
But they saw him as Tatty Boy, and then he came back as her vassal, and most people didn't know. And then meanwhile, Mary the whole time knew it was the same person. I think it's so adorable.
It was him because of her interaction with him in the first book. So.
Yep.
Yeah, and well, also I feel like Lymond was honest with Mary in ways that he wasn't with, like, I mean, the whole scene with Una where he brought her in, like Mary was part of the plan with Una, which was super cool. Like he trusted her as a kid to be part of it and to know what was going on, and yeah, like his relationship with her is really another reason why I think it would be interesting if he had a kid. But
yeah,
he definitely like respects her mind in ways that nobody seems to, which is cool.
And we've seen him time and time again drop what he's doing to go rescue her. Which I don't think he's doing for the Queen Dowager. I think he's doing it out of a sense of honor and respect for this child. So.
Like,
for the child and for the country, because the child and the country are kind of interchangeable. Not interchangeable, but they're both like equally important to him. She's important because she is who she is for Scotland, and it would hurt Scotland if she died. But I think also he spends a lot of time with her and playing with her and telling her riddles, and he behaved the same way.
yeah.
So of all people in the court, she's the one most likely to have seen the similarities between that Tatty Boy and her vassal.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's really funny that I found that just Marie Dee's reaction was so funny, a little helplessly, as she's just like, holy shit, the child knew the whole time. Oh my God. Like there's nothing you can even do with that except be like,
Okay.
Good thing she didn't spoil it to the court.
Yeah.
And I love how she gives him her favor by giving him her glove to wear during the duel. So
there's a couple fun bits in the duel that I guess I'll call out. Feel free to jump in. At the top of 507, I love how Lymond had the desperate expression, which more spectators than he knew in that audience recognized as a devastating impulse to laugh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just so him. And the fact that not only is that so him, but also that more people realize that that's what's going on with him than he realizes.
Yeah. And I also love that he just doesn't even bother. I love this bit about like he simply was not troubled to compete with that. Or he had shrieked down all efforts to compel him. Like he was just like, no. First of all, he's not even gonna, like, it's ridiculous. He's not even gonna do it. And anybody who asks him to, he's just gonna be like, no, I'm not gonna do it. And so he just shows up in like super plain clothes, which are nice, but plain. And,
well, but with a giant diamond and the queen's glove. So it's like, I don't need any other finery than this. I have the favor of the king and the queen.
Yeah.
I love the group of character descriptions, the one-line character descriptions on page 507 about all of the people that are sort of watching from the stands, and how it succinctly sort of captures where they are now from the beginning of the story to the end, because this is really the write-off for these characters in this book, like their last line about them, and they're just all so perfectly apt for where those characters are at.
Yeah.
Oh, Liam Rowe and Michelle Harrison.
His newly grown whiskers, like not only did his whiskers grow back, but it's also like entendre for like he's got his groove, you know? He's got
his mojo back.
He's sort of found what he was looking for, and it's back now. So
yeah. And it's
I was just say I love the Michelle description as well. Like he's shouting in a corner.
squashed in a corner, shouting something and being silenced by a guard.
Yeah.
I love
Um,
Margaret's description, the quiet, deep woman who was older now than her own mother ever would be. And even
So-
George Douglas, whom France had treated kindly and whom might not find Scotland so kind.
Yeah.
I mean, the Queen Dowager finds him kind. She gave him his son the governorship of, is it Arran? Or no, someplace in Scotland, I forget.
Morton, I think.
Yeah, Morton, no.
Mm. Also the rare crooked smile of Abernathy and the shameless stare of Tosh. Abernathy was fun in this book, right?
Yeah. He was good.
Definitely. I'm so happy that he wasn't treacherous or like a betrayer, because I was worried in the beginning that it might turn out he wasn't quite what we thought he would be. But
I really hope he shows up again, which I feel like, so we're getting into hopes for later, but I hope that Lymond travels. Like, I know we've got some hints that he's going back to Scotland, like this George Douglas thing about Scotland not being so kind, and there's kind of some hints that he's going to go back to Scotland, but I really hope that Lymond travels around and like we get to see him all over places. And I feel like Abernathy, like he could just show up spots because he's got a circus, you know, so he can be like going around the circus. So I hope that I hope he comes back.
Why do you want him? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Laura.
Why don't you ask more about why you want him to come back? Like, what did you like about him, and what would you want to see more of? Or
Well, I think he's a dependable character who's interesting. You know, like I think he's a good. If we want to go with the James Bond metaphor, like, you know, Lymond is sort of a version of Dunnett's version of James Bond, or her response to Ian Fleming, you know, like then Abernathy could be sort of like the Q character, you know, like he's supportive and he kind of helps him do things and is like it's nice to have a foil like that. It's nice to have a character that Lymond can talk about things with, or, you know, do those kind of things. So, and I like all the animals. As long as we stop torturing them.
stop killing them.
We could have his cabbage. Come back with his cabbage.
Mon petit cabbage.
There's also, I like that we kind of, I think, are in Lymond's point of view, where it says, inescapable in the herald's strong, trained voice, his extraordinary title, Francis Crawford of Lymond, Comte de Sevigny. So he sort of went through this whole crisis of identity, no longer being the master of Coulter, and now he's sort of like got to wrap his head around, wait a minute, I have a title again now, but it's a different title and it's in France. And,
French.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was interesting how he kind of he says, no longer master of Coulter as he had always been. Well, that was an old story now. It's like, oh. So, I don't know.
Well, it's an old story, like he's gotten over it. You know, it sucked to lose his title, but he loves his nephew, he loves his brother, he's moving on. And then we go through this whole Marie de Guise thing. Philippe, do you want to talk us through that? We end up in her point of view.
We spend a couple
back.
of pages learning more history about Marie de Guise and how, you know, she was married to the Scottish king at the time, because she was from France. The de Guises are French, and then she moved to Scotland. And it's a lot of history about her, which is interesting, but I sort of skimmed through, unfortunately, because number one, I was trying to finish this before this, but also I don't think it's terribly pertinent to the story. But what is pertinent to the story is her discussion. It flashes back to her discussion with Lymond that happened earlier this day, and sort of her reasoning for how she treated him at the boar baiting and what sort of happened because of it. She realizes that she sort of lost all trust in him, or his trust in her after this. And that I think she knows that in the future, she has no control over him and she can't exert her power, that he's become a free agent after this.
I mean, I think that one of the interesting things about this whole recitation of her history is just the emphasis on the fact that Marie de Guise, she's not a power in and of herself. Like she's dependent on her family, the dead king, the fact that she has a daughter, the people are like the Erskines and the Douglases and the like all the people around her, and the that she is trying to move these pieces on a chessboard and it's not always working. It just kind of gives you that sense of how unstable everything is for everyone. The English, those in power in England, those in power in France, those in power in Scotland, those in power in Ireland, like everything is so unstable. And they've made these references to like, oh, now we have this treaty and everything's going to be good. And we've got, England and France have a treaty and England and Scotland have a treaty and da, da, da. And yet this really emphasizes that it's super, like this could fall apart at any moment.
Well, and in a way, it's a parallel with Lymond. He doesn't have his own power base either. He's also dependent on other people, which is where he makes this decision, kind of jumping ahead, that he needs to kind of formulate an independent power base so he's not so dependent. But before we go there, actually, there's a part right at the beginning of this, it's the top of 508, where she's thinking about Lymond accepting his title and that he only accepted it for his brother's sake in her guess. So I guess meaning that, he's basically saying, like, demonstrating to the world, I don't want my brother's, land, mid-culture is his, I have all, wish the best for my nephew, and therefore he accepts a different title so that there's no, like, conflict of interest there. And then also, she's thinking back to their discussion, she'd been so sure that he was hers, and it did not go her way. But it says she had hoped for his craft and strength only. She had refused him out of fear for her own eminence and her own policies, any exercise of his other abilities. So, like, she probably could have had him, like, if she had treated him with respect and valued what he could bring to the table. But no, she didn't.
Yeah. And then we get this really nice bit of dark foreshadowing at the end of this whole section, or at least at the bottom of 509, where it says, she's talking about like all of these problems that are happening and bad things that happen. So if Edward of England died, his successor would be the Catholic Mary Tudor. And obviously we know he dies. Like, I feel like that's not a spoiler. Like, if me and my very small knowledge of English history know that Edward's going to die pretty soon. If Edward of England died, his successor would be the Catholic Mary Tudor, and her nobles would look for no sympathy there. On the other hand, and the Lennoxes, Catholic, royal, and potential usurpers, were Mary Tudor's dear friends. So we get this dun, 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 like, what's going to happen?
The Lennoxes will be back in favor in England very soon.
Yeah, and I totally think we're going to pick up that storyline at some point in the future of these books. Although I think the next book is a little too soon for that.
Because how old is Edward in this? Do we know how old Edward is right now? Because I think he dies in his early teens.
I'd say young teens, I think.
Yeah. So he's like 14 or something? I don't remember. But he definitely does not become an adult. So somehow.
And I forget how he dies. Is it sickness?
He's just sick.
Yeah.
I think it's also interesting going back to 508, where Marie de Guise is thinking of, she's doing all of this for the throne, for the grandson who one day surely would reign over Ireland, Scotland, and France. But we know that her grandson is going to be the King of England, not France.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
England and Scotland, not France and Scotland.
Yeah, not Ireland.
Not Ireland.
England and Scotland, not France and Ireland.
So it's just funny. She's doing all this for this hope of, Mary's son, her grandson, that doesn't exist, and that, like, we just know reading this isn't this what she wants to happen isn't actually what's going to happen. And then also we know that she's doing all of this for her family. She's not doing this for the good of Scotland. She's doing this for the good of the de Guise family. So again, we see why Lymond wouldn't ally himself, and kind of going back to the different characters in this and how they're all parallels with some aspect of Lymond. I feel like it's a really clear parallel with Una, who allied herself with Cormac O'Connor, and then kind of went down this rabbit hole of this person who was out for himself, not out for what was best for Ireland. And the same thing would happen if Lymond actually like fully committed himself to Marie de Guise, because there's a conflict. He cares about Scotland, but what she cares about is herself and her family.
Yeah. And it's so interesting how her plans completely skip over Mary. Like, she's planning for this non-existent grandson, not for the daughter that is literally in front of her. It's just like, oh. Anyway. Yeah.
And again, I think we have, so then it's on 510, another kind of flashback of, she had cast him in her mind simply as a picturesque adventurer, and that grimly was what he had shown her from first to last. Mm-hmm. And I think the word grimly is really interesting in there, because Tatty Boy is it seemed like such a carefree, fun thing, but then we have this word grimly that's like, he showed her this, what she expected, or she thought low of him, and so he then played this part because she thought low of him. So in a way, it's a little bit of like we have this recurring kind of like bitterness and these things he does that are kind of like a screw you, you thought this is all I am, so this is all I'll be. So it's an interesting take on why he became Tatty Boy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I love that what you said. It's like, yeah, it's like, screw you. If you think this is all I am, this is all I'm going to be. And again, not a very mature attitude though. So like, how old is he? Return to that question.
One day we will know, hopefully.
Yeah. And I love this bit halfway through 510 where it says, she's talking about the boar baiting incident and like why she did what she did with the boar baiting incident. And she says, and when she read the disgust in his eyes, she had known again that she had been wrong. She had been wrong and she had lost him.
Well, because she thought that he was going to appreciate it, to present him a stage on which he might exhibit himself as he seemed to delight to the best advantage, a promise of the applause and admiration in store for him, a favorite at her side. He doesn't want applause and admiration. He couldn't care less. He cares about Scotland and helping the people.
Yeah, and she just has misread him start to finish, and it cost her.
And then we also have this, like, she's thinking back to, he was there to save Mary and he did that, but he didn't tell her any of the secrets that he learned. And it's like, she wouldn't give him her confidences, so he's not giving her his.
Yep.
And then again, the same thing I think is interesting is, she says, I offer you a child to fashion. Like, you can shape how Mary, Queen of Scots, grows. And she kind of has like a hint of, what he wants, right? Because he does want Mary to become a good leader for Scotland. But he's like, I'll fashion her if you send her to Scotland, because what he cares about is Scotland. He doesn't want to be raising Scotland's, leader in France as a French person. He wants someone who puts Scotland first. And he's going to go put Scotland first.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yes. And this whole thing about when she says, men fall short of your desire and so you abandon men. And it's like, that's not that's not what Lymond does. And ouch, first of all. But yeah, she just doesn't understand him. So, yeah.
Well, and I think what she's trying to do is, she says a leader with no following, blah, blah, blah. So like, she's basically saying you on your own are going to burn out, is what she says. You're not really going to be able to make a difference in the world. So like, ally with me and you'll have a power base and you'll be able to make a difference. And then his counter to that is on 512, where he says, if you wish me to lead, I shall lead. In Scotland, I shall make a company of men who can match any fighting men in the world. So he's like kind of explicitly saying, I'm not going to ally myself with you. I'm not going to ally myself with Queen Catherine and the Constable. I am going to, find a way to have an independent power base where I can make decisions for the good of Scotland without having to compromise and sell myself to all these people who want me for their own ends.
Yeah.
Which again, I think directly comes from like looking at, one, he was already afraid of it, but two, looking at the situation Una ended up in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I want to read this paragraph where she's trying to bribe him, right? Like, I mean, just flat out bribing him. Like, you can have architects and houses, and I'll give you a knighthood, and you can raise my daughter. And like, I mean, holy crap, she's like throwing everything but the kitchen sink at him.
Yeah.
And so then she's like, I don't think you understand what I offer. So then he had answered, rising as she rose, his eyes clear under the smooth brow where youth sat, the youth she would close in her fists if she could, the youth she coveted, raging to fling against the mewing pack of wild creatures, the Douglases, the Stewarts, the Hamiltons, the ambitious sons, and the kingly bastards, and all young, 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 who would one day snap at her vacant throne. And in all his enviable youth, he stood before her and said, I have understood and I have refused, if you blah, 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 this whole company of men thing. But I'm just like, how old is he? Like, what the hell?
We should have a betting pool. See who gets closest.
Ooh.
I don't know. There's just things of it. It's like, is he 17? Like, how young can he be? Like, that's crazy. So, yeah. Like, was Margaret sleeping with a 12-year-old? Like, this is so gross. So, anyway.
So I think also there's an interesting little parallel with what he says about Scotland and what William Rowe said about Ireland in his big confrontation with Cormac, where Lymond says, the brilliance and beauty of France were all ours and more 40 years ago. They ended with Flodden, and they cannot be pinned on afresh like a decaying rose. They must grow again in insecurity. It has been merry, but the time for follies is over. So this is kind of, I think, goes back to where Liam was talking about Ireland, and he was saying that, you know, what this country needs isn't people that are taking it into war for their own power. What it needs is people who are, you know, helping to plant things and build things and, you know, create old men, like help people to live healthy, happy lives and live into their old age. And so Lymond is saying, like, the focus should not be on France and trying to take the glories of France and just like pin it on Scotland. It's like taking, you know, this nobility from France coming over there. It's like, no, we need to actually help Scotland and the Scottish people to grow. And I don't know the history of what happened, what it was like before Flodden, but clearly there was a golden age that is gone and that he wants to help revive in Scotland. And then also the time for follies is over, I think is very telling of where his head is at in terms of his next steps, right? I've been playing, having adventures, but now I'm gonna, you know, grow up and go build this army in Scotland, apparently.
Okay. So then we get Diabne being a petty jerk.
Yep, he's got this ridiculous laundry list of things that would be impossible for Lymond to find. And he, of course, naturally assumes in his arrogance that, well, I've won this little battle because there's no way. To which Lymond's reply is, yes, I have all of these things. And Daubeny instantly recognizes that they are all from the king, which I feel is almost the ultimate slap in the face to him.
Oh, yeah.
He's had this, like, these different levels of betrayal. So first he gets caught by Robin Stewart, which he can easily dismiss. Then Lymond also puts forth the accusation, which is also easily dismissible because of his sort of reputation in France. Then you get the really bad sting of your brother coming in and sort of disavowing you, to which leads to this level. And then this final slap in the face from the king, who's, you know, been your friend for all of these years. And it's just this delicious growing pyramid of betrayal that I think just gets him in the end. And it's a fate really for him that's worse than execution or death. Like, he's going to be exiled to the far reaches of the country, and like his reputation is done for. So
yeah. And I think that this is really Catherine's doing, because we saw in the previous scene where the constable and Catherine and the king are all talking about this, and the king is saying, you know, like, he'll be exiled. But Catherine is the one who says, like, yes, but it needs to be obvious. Like, there's a point where she says, we need to it must be obvious that he's, you know, out of favor, is the implication. And so I think this whole giving Lymond the armor thing, like, my guess is that's Catherine's doing, which
probably
is, you know.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. Yeah, my note card says, Dee should be happy the king finally did something.
I know, right? I mean,
But did he? I mean, he did. It was his action.
Did
But
he take responsibility? No. At least he did something. Like, yeah. And this idea that this thing that Diabni has done with the armor, it's super petty. Everybody knows it. It says it's the most ill-mannered and preemptory in the whole game of arms. Like it's so ill-mannered to do this. And then it says later, long before the list ended, the laughter died. The form of mockery did not seem particularly witty, and they had all at least expected to witness a fight. So it's like, they're like, this thing that he thought was going to be such a great plan to win, everyone's like, dude, you're a jerk and not very smart about it.
Yeah, and it's really one note and it's boring. Like, hey, we're here for a fight, instead we're listening to someone read a long list and we're not even going to get a fight.
Super boring.
yes. And of course, even when this long list of things is provided, instead of actually being the honorable man and taking the fight, he chooses to walk away because he knows there's no way he'd win.
Yeah. I also love the fact that when Francis says, I do, like, I do said Francis Crawford. Also interesting that he's Francis Crawford. I do said Francis Crawford with the clarity, the abandon, the felicity of some royal bridegroom. So, like, I do. So funny. Yeah.
I think it's interesting. So then he ends up fighting with the Dom, just for like display, which is apparently a form of flirtation. So the Dom, not accustomed to doing his courting with a poniard.
Yeah.
But then I think it's interesting. Francis Crawford fought delicately like an automaton, his eyes largely elsewhere, and won, which tells us a lot. One, he doesn't care about this at all. He's just playing his part. Two, he's really capable and competent because even though he's not paying attention, he still wins. And three, like an automaton, I think is interesting because we had that whole like metaphor of him as a machine, maybe a broken machine. Now he's clearly a very highly functioning machine, but there's this idea of this aspect of him where he can like run like a machine and not, engage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then I love that he gives this probable bribe from the king to marry. And he's just like, it's such a clear, like, no, he's not going to be beholden to anyone. He's not going to owe anybody anything. You don't have a hold on him. Like, it's so great.
Well, and then the end with Mary is really interesting because she asks him for a riddle. She asks him for a song, and he very politely, very gracefully says no and leaves. So he's even demonstrating that his loyalty to Mary has its limits and that he doesn't belong to her. His care for her is as a person, as a child, and for the greater good of Scotland, but he's not going to be ruled by her any more than he's going to be ruled by her mother.
Right. But also she sings. Like, I think it's interesting that he leaves and she sings, taking both parts. And so I think it's a little bit of an idea that like he left her with the knowledge to do this on her own. And so she asked him for a song, but she was able to sing the song herself. So it's nice. Yeah.
It's nice.
Also, he does keep her glove.
He does.
He does. Yeah.
And that is the end of the current story.
We're done.
Yay. Can't believe she wrote this in
Continued.
1961.
And Disorderly Nights, I have it. And I haven't looked at it at all. So
Yeah, I haven't opened mine up either.
So speaking of Disorderly Nights, what do you want to happen in that?
a whole lot of good, fun stuff. No more death, which is clearly not going to happen. I mean, the no more death part. The rest of it will be fun. So I know, Lauren, you
to be like a.
This is one of your favorites. So
I love this one.
I just wanted there to be like a heist and everyone goes on an adventure and then nobody dies and it's great, and that's not gonna happen.
I feel like we're definitely going to see Lymond back in Scotland for a bit, and we're going to have some Scotland stuff, but I don't know if it's going to stay in Scotland the whole time. That might be cool. Yeah.
It feels weird to. I feel like it would be weird to have a whole next book set in Scotland, just because we were in Scotland for a whole book and then we were in France for a whole book. Now I want to go somewhere else.
But if we go back to Scotland, we can at least catch up with the characters we've left behind. Like, I want to see what's going on with Sibylla, with Will Scott, with Bouclou, you know.
Oh
If, you
yeah.
know.
Maybe we'll figure out the whole Sibylla mystery. Maybe that's the whole next book. Maybe, I mean, there's so many hints about that dropped in this book. Maybe that's the driving force of the next book.
Mm-hmm.
What
I'd
do
be
you
interested to see characters from the book we just read mixing with characters from the first. So, like, if Oliamro is still around, if Una pops back up in the next book. Um, I mean, there'll definitely be implications for everything that just happened in France. Because if Lymond does go back to Scotland for a while, he's definitely leaving Mary Queen of Scots behind in France for at least a little while longer until the Dauphin dies and she comes back.
Yeah. I would like to see exactly what you said. I want to see Oliamra. I want to see Una. I'm intrigued a little bit with the Dame de whatever her name is. Dame de
Dutons?
Yeah, I can never remember her name. I feel like she had a lot of knowledge that was very unexplained why she has it. Like, and it felt like there's more, like she knows Sibylla. There's just like she was a super minor character in this book, but it seemed like she has way more knowledge than she should have as such a minor character. So, but I don't think we're going to stick around in France, and she's in France, so maybe she's just going to disappear and that'll just be a mystery. But I don't know, I feel like she's going to come back. I really want to see the fallout from Robin. Just like, what does this whole thing mean for Lymond? What does it mean for how he thinks about leadership, how he thinks about mentoring? Yeah, I'd like Will Scott to come back. That would be fun. It'd be fun to see him some more. I want to see Kate and Gideon come back. Like, we didn't get to see them at all. So the whole Kate and Gideon and Philippa, it'd be fun to see them to come back. Not just because I like Philippa, but
And I'm sure there'll be a whole bunch of new characters that it's going to take me forever to differentiate in the beginning.
oh my gosh, so true. Yeah, it'd be nice if they're not all named Margaret. Like, can we just, here's my request, can we have no more Margarets in the story? Because there's just so many Margarets.
It depends on history, unfortunately, because we know it's a mix of real characters and fictional ones. Dee, you said you had a list of questions you wanted to see answered. Is that a good time to go into this?
I mean, we've kind of touched on him. Like, so I want to know Lymond's age. Are we ever going to find that out? Like, okay, that's a good question for you, Laura. Like, don't give us a hint on what it is. Do we ever actually find out what it is?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. All right.
I mean, she set up that mystery so well that I almost feel like you'd have to find out. So
Gotta know.
Yeah.
I want to find out how old he is. I definitely want to explore the mystery of what's going on with Sibylla, and is Lymond legitimate, illegitimate? Is Richard illegitimate? Was Eloise illegitimate? Like, is there a combination of like one is and one isn't? Is there, like, you know what would be super interesting? Oh, I'm having a thought. You know what would be super interesting is if Richard is illegitimate and Lymond is legitimate. Because they have gone their whole lives with Richard being assumed as the heir and Lymond as the spare, you know, the not one. And if that is actually not true, that is a dilemma for Lymond, because then would he kick his brother out and his nephew or not?
I don't feel like he would.
I don't either. I don't think he would. I think he would just let the lie continue. Like, okay,
yeah, especially to protect Sibylla's honor.
Huh?
Especially to protect Sibylla's honor.
Yeah. Like, he would never let like anybody have proof of what's going on with his mother. So.
But not only that, he loves Richard, and we saw him kind of give his blessing to Kevin. He wouldn't want to ruin Richard's life.
Kevin. It sounds so modern. Kevin. Yeah. It sounds like a girl, like having a girl named Crystal or something in this story.
Kevin is an old Irish name. It's
I know. It just sounds so modern. I don't know why. I guess because I knew a ton of Kevins when I was a kid. Yeah, that would be. I would be interested to see that dilemma if that is the case. I don't know. I feel like, though, if we follow that storyline, like, I really want to know a lot more about Sibylla. And we know that Gavin, is that their dad?
Mm-hmm.
Gavin, we know that he was horrible.
Yeah.
So, like, I can see it being sympathetic. Like, if one or more of the kids is illegitimate, I can see that being a very sympathetic story on Sibylla's part. But I hope that we actually learn that story. So
Well, certainly some
I don't
hints
know
have
if
been
we'll
dropped.
get it right away, but I mean, we've got 4 more books to figure it out. So
that's true, we do. Yeah, I mean, that's okay.
What do you think are the like aspects of this book or lessons learned in this book or parallels and themes from this book that will manifest in future books, and how?
I mean, we've already definitely talked about Lymond's his action versus inaction, and what he's responsible for and the consequences of how his manipulations carry out on people. I think he's tried now 2 different ways, 2 different methods in these 2 different books, and neither of them has sort of led to the results that he hopes for. So I don't know if we'll see a melding of those or something completely different, but
I think he's going to continue to explore his leadership style, what that means. Does he want to be a leader? Does he not? Like, does he want to run away from home and be like, and not be involved in anything? You know, is that, is he going to build this army of, you know, I mean, he's kind of had like a mercenary gang already, like that. He's explored that idea and it seemed to be pretty successful. So he does understand at least how to be a leader to a small band of men, and he engendered quite strong loyalty on their part. So yeah, so that his whole thing with Robin is going to be a thing going forward. I think his insistence on not getting married, like outside of the whole like romance partner thing, I think it says something interesting about his thoughts about family. And like, does he want a family? Does he think that he deserves a family? Like, he obviously loves his brother and his mother very much. So it seems interesting to me that he has land and he has a title. Like, it seems interesting that that's sort of what would seem to be a natural progression of, now I should have my own family. Like, that is not part of his like vision for himself right now. At least if he was being truthful to Margaret Erskine, which who knows, he could have been completely, he could have been messing with her. But
We didn't talk about that quote that he says at that scene. Better to be whipped than humored, better to be crushed than cherished. It was a woman told me that. Who was the woman that told him that? What does that mean? Does he not want to be humored and cherished? And why? Like, it's all very flippant, so it's hard to really take it too seriously, but I do wonder if there's an aspect of like, he thinks,
it.
yeah, I don't deserve, I mean, we know he has a low opinion of himself, but also that he's not interested in being cherished, right? He's like, he wants this violent, action-oriented life, or he thinks he does. He doesn't really.
Yeah, thinks he does. Like, that seems super weird. So yeah, I don't know. I just want to see what's happening next.
But I do think a romance where someone was humoring him and cherishing him and very sappy, like, wouldn't be what appeals to him. Maybe that's his idea of marriage, and so that's why he's against it, and he doesn't realize
Right.
that there's other.
Boring, and he doesn't
Yeah.
want boring. Yeah. Which that makes sense. I mean, the whole concept of like hearth and home and all that would be like Margaret Erskine would make a terrible wife for him, like
Yeah.
he would just be super bored, so if he's going to have that, he needs to have somebody who's vibrant and able to hold her own with him, or his own, so I think one of the things that we're ignoring is that maybe he ends up with a guy, except that this was written in the 60s, and so probably not. But either way, like, he needs somebody who's able to call him on his bullshit and and keep up with him and all of that.
Yes. You started talking about Lymond. If he had kids, what would that be like? Do you want to speculate any more about that?
I just think he'd be super protective.
Yeah.
And uber loyal and fierce.
I think it could be a detriment to his sort of espionage. Like if the future villains find out about it, they could use it against him.
For sure. Like, that would seem to be a huge vulnerability for him. Like, I mean, his family already is. Like, you can imagine if somebody threatens his mother or threatens his brother, or, he's gonna, there would be nothing else motivating him until he fixed it, So I think the same would be true if he ends up having children at some point. Like, he's just gonna be like a lion with cuffs, just totally protective and all of that. Yeah.
The morality around, or the responsibility of a parent to a bastard child back then, is quite different than it would be now, though.
Yeah, but I don't see him caring so much about that.
I don't think it would bother Lymond if it was a bastard or not.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to care at all. I don't know how he would do, like, being like the day-to-day dad stuff. Like, I'm not so sure. I think actually, no, I take that back. He's super good with Mary in the little interactions and stuff. So, he'd probably be a phenomenal dad. And yeah, I don't see him caring at all. I mean, we see how he treats the prostitutes in his life and the way that he, sees. And I think that that's just an extension of his perhaps disregard for like conventional ideas about who has value and who doesn't.
Yeah, for sure. Very likable to us as modern audiences because he's quite modern and tolerant in his views.
We like him.
Most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time. He does stupid things sometimes, but we like him.
Yeah, well, I mean, you came into this book liking him, which is impressive, because I think this is, he definitely descends to some pretty awful behavior, and there's a certain point where you're like, oh my God, stop being drunk all the time.
Yeah. I mean, but I'll say this over and over, and I think it's really true. I think Philippe and I are really benefited by the fact that we're reading this book so slowly, and that we're having these huge conversations all the way through the book. And so I think that my opinion of Lymond in this book would probably be much more negative if we weren't stopping and talking about it all the way through. And so, like, we're processing all these decisions he's making and what are his possible motivations and why could he be doing that. And we're processing that all the way through the book. And I think that made a huge difference. So.
Yeah, actually, I agree with that. And I think also she kind of sets him up to be unlikable often, and then she kind of sidewipes you with like, surprise, he's actually had a good reason for that.
Yeah. Like the poison.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and so we were able, I think, to speculate about possible reasons in a way that I wouldn't have speculated if I'd been reading it just all the way through,
Yeah, and I think it is interesting because you may dislike him more, and you may get less of the effect of his, oh, he had a good reason, oh, right? Because you already kind of were sympathetic.
That's true. That is true.
Did you have anything else written down, Dee, in your speculations?
No. I just want to go back to characters I liked in the past and meet new characters that we'll see. And oh, one thing is, I would like there to be a really competent villain.
Yeah.
Like, because I feel like we haven't seen that yet. Like in the first book, it was sort of Lymond against circumstances and Lymond against problematic people who done bad things, but there wasn't like a villain. And in this one, our villain was like laughably horrible, and he sort of stumbled into causing Lymond problems, but it wasn't because he was a super genius or anything. So I would like to see like an actual opponent to Lymond who is like, that we're genuinely worried that Lymond may fail. Like, I would like to see that, us be scared that someone is going to prevail, you know, because they are competent and smart and evil. I think that'd be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this book too is more like his biggest threats were his own kind of descent into alcoholism, and he missed really obvious things. Like Robin Stewart's not that threatening, but he missed it because he was distracted. So in both of these, his biggest enemy was himself. But yeah, you also said you wanted like a heist or something. You wanted an adventure.
Oh yeah, I'm kidding, but that would be fun, right? Like,
but you get that kind of adventure stuff, but also like with a great villain, right? It gives you the tension and the drama.
Like they have to break into the Tower of London and steal the crown jewel.
Right. Like I was thinking of something like, it'd be fun to have like something like the Crown Affair, you know? Like they have to go steal something, or they have to be like spies somewhere. Like, you know, it would be super fun to see Lymond as like an actual spy, like sneaking into places. Because we know he can sneak into places. You know, he's done that multiple times. You know, like really being, and we sort of implied in this one, like his ability with languages, and like we see all of that. So it'd be fun to like see him like actually in a sober sense, like go be a spy somewhere.
I mean, we saw more of a Liam sneaking into places in this book than we did of Lymond.
Incompetently so, but yeah. Yeah, it's true. Like sneaking around the bookstore and
sneaking into Cormac O'Connor's sort of stronghold.
Yeah.
I mean, Lymond was definitely a spy in the sense he was in disguise and he kind of hid who he was and he got information. But yeah, that wasn't like the main, I guess, time we spent with him.
It would be fun to see him do that. Yeah, I just want to see.
What do you think is the, like, where's this thing going with him being such an incredible singer and an incredible musician? But the time for Follies is over.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I mean, we've talked about, I think I talked a couple of times ago about like the artist being vulnerable when they perform, you know, and so is he going to lose some of that? Was that something that the sort of alcohol and letting loose and all that of Tatty Boy allowed to happen, and that he will now never go back to that? I hope that's not true. But I don't know, if he's so young, if he's as young as we suspect he is, like, is he gonna lose that as he grows up? Like, is that gonna be something he puts away, or is it gonna be something he grows into? Like that he's able to be more of that.
So speaking of his age, you want to place your bets? How old was he in this book?
24.
Okay, it totally depends on how skeevy I think Margaret Lennox is. Like that's what this all hinges on. Is if Margaret Lennox is super skeevy, then he could be like 17. If she's not like that skeevy, then he's probably 22, 24, something like that. So I don't know. I want to say early 20s, but I feel like the way people are talking that he's not yet 20, because like I'm just thinking about like the way age is throughout history. Like there wasn't really a concept of adolescence. So
Most of these people saying this are in their 30s though. Like Learmo's 30. The Queen Dowager is in her 30s.
okay.
Una is 10 years older than Lymond.
Maybe early 20s, and they would still see that as youth.
I mean, it's just so I think the question is like, yeah, a lot of what was said about him as a spy in Scotland before the battle, Solway Moss, was obviously like total bull and not true. But at the same time, like if he was 7, you know, how could he possibly have been a spy for him?
Yeah, that makes no sense. Right. That's true. So was he a spy for Solway Moss? And we know that was 10 years ago.
That was no, it wasn't 10 years. It was 5 years before Game of Kings, and then 2 years before this, so it was 7 years ago.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
But he could have been like 14 then, which would make him 21.
Which would mean Margaret Lennox is super skeevy.
Super skeevy.
We already know she's
hard
skeevy.
to jump to that conclusion.
Okay, I'm gonna say 21. That might be too young of a guess.
And I'll stick with 24. I'm gonna write them down for perpetuity.
We're recorded.
You can go back to the
True.
All
right. Any other, I guess, thoughts on this book, hopes for the next or the rest of the series?
One thing I definitely enjoy about the series, which we kind of lost in this one because we figured it out so early, is the mystery and like what's going to happen. What's the main mystery? So like the first book was who is Lymond? This one was who is the villain who's trying to kill the queen? So I'm interested to sort of pick that back up with the next book. And of course, I'm going to be reading the first couple chapters with a very critical eye, and every single new character that comes in, I'm going to be playing I'm an imposter syndrome with to see if I can figure out who he's trying to be this time. If he's even doing that in this next book, who knows?
I mean, I don't think she's going to repeat herself. So I don't think we're going to have the same mystery.
No, but I definitely feel like he's going to take the guise of someone else at some point in the next couple books. So
he is so good at it. Yeah, I don't know. I really enjoy the mysteries a lot, but I also really don't want to be wrong.
Yeah. We've had a pretty good track record, Dee. We've guessed a lot of stuff.
I'm so afraid that like our whole Lymond debacle is gonna get repeated, and we're gonna like be totally fooled by something. So.
It wasn't our best moment, but
it's not our best moment.
I think we more than made up for it in this book. So.
I hope so. But it is fun. Like even as much as that was like, oh man, she totally fooled me. But at the same time, it was really fun. Like that was a cool thing. So if she does it again, that's okay.
Like apparently almost everybody gets fooled by that. So
yeah. So if it happens again, I'm fine with it.
I was glad you guys were fooled by that because I think most people get fooled by that, and then they feel like, oh God, am I the only one? Am I dumb because I didn't get it? But it's definitely easy to get fooled. But then again, there are many, many clues that Lymond is Tatty Boy. So
yeah. I one thing, I think you mentioned this before, Laura. One thing I'm glad about getting fooled with was that I did have so much more sympathy for everyone else. Like when everybody else,
couldn't tell them apart. Yeah,
figure it out, then it's like that made that part of the story much more solid for me as a reader, because I was like, yeah, sure, why not?
The best way to get you in the headspace of a character is to literally put you in that same headspace. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I think we're good to wrap up. Yeah. And we'll see everyone next time with Disorderly Nights.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.